Good morning, everyone. We are aware of the audio issues, so we are now trying to address them.
Good morning and welcome to our special Tobago edition entitled Coast to Coast, Next Stop Tobago. This venture is the fruition of a promise given at our seminar earlier this year. I am Derek DeGans, the current CEO and Director of G.A. Farrell and Associates Limited. It is my privilege to begin today's proceedings by acknowledging the esteemed members of the Board of Directors of G.A. Farrell and Associates Limited. Our Chair, Mr. Trevor Nicholas Gomez, our Chair Emeritus and Director, Mr. Mark Farrell, Directors Mrs. Kavita Daly, Mrs. Melissa Johnson, Mr. Ryan Chin, and our Secretary, Mrs. Mary Jardine. Next, I'd like to acknowledge our panel of esteemed presenters in order of today's agenda. Dr. Indera Sagewan, economist, Mr. Chris James, past President of Tobago Hotel Association, Ms. Oneesha Paul, Attorney at Law, Mr. Renaldo Belfon, Managing Director of the Skiro Business Group. We are grateful for your presence and look forward to your insightful and engaging presentations. Our moderator and host for today's proceedings is our own Dr. Sunil Lalu, FRICS. I extend a warm welcome to everyone for joining us virtually. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in today's event. As G.A. Farrell and Associates Limited approaches its upcoming 50th anniversary in 2026, it would be remiss of me not to take a moment to acknowledge the immense gratitude to our beloved founder, Mr. Charles Arthur Gordon Farrell, fondly known as Gordon Farrell. Gordon celebrated his 102nd birthday this past August, and we look forward to celebrating not only a further milestone birthday, but also the company's 50th anniversary in 2026. Given Gordon's current health status, we are hopeful he will continue to reach even greater milestones. Today's webinar allows us to engage with a broad spectrum of professionals and share timely, stimulating content on the economy and emerging trends in the valuation and residential real estate sectors with a Tobago slant. A special thank you to all our stakeholders, banks, financial institutions, insurance companies, credit unions, Association of Real Estate Agents of Trinidad and Tobago, real estate brokers and agents, developers, and all affiliated professionals for taking the time to join us virtually today. We look forward to your active participation in today's event. Do enjoy the day.
Thank you very much, Derek, and welcome everyone to Coast, our first ever Tobago webinar. As you know, we have an annual webinar that is open to the public, and the agenda typically goes around current issues and trends in real estate, and particularly the ones that have an impact on property value and also the marketability of property. These things affect banking transactions, mortgages, how people interact with the real estate market, as well as the general economic conditions of the country, right? So the way in which people buy and sell real estate, what impacts on value of property is a reflection of how things are happening in the country in general. And you would see in very active property markets, it reflects again economic conditions in a country. Ease of doing business is directly related as well to how transactions are done in real estate. So to start us off, it would be best if we were to contextualize the real estate market in the general issues of the country's economy and how we are doing. And I can think of no one better than Dr. Indera Sagewan, who is here with us, and she would be starting us off. Indera is no stranger to us, and she has been a presenter in our seminars before. She has a PhD in International Competitiveness from the UWI Institute of International Relations and is a specialist consultant in competitiveness and sustainable development. Her specialization is in private sector export competitiveness, global value chain and economic clustering, and she's also an adjunct lecturer in international trade and economic growth at UWI. She holds an MSc and BA in economics from UWI and several international specialized training diplomas in areas ranging from private sector development, oil and gas management, project management, innovation, value chain and cluster analysis, and adult training in leadership and emotional intelligence. Wow. Indera is currently the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Economics Association and the former executive director of Caribbean Center for Competitiveness. Through this organization, hundreds of private sector executives, policymakers, and academics were trained in innovative approaches to competitiveness and significant industry and sectoral cluster studies to expand export competitiveness were commissioned. Prior to this, she worked as principal consultant of Applied Learning and Solutions, a firm which specialized in cost-benefit analysis, strategic management, and corporate training in soft skills such as leadership and development. She's a well-respected expert facilitator and presenter at workshops and conferences like this one, and a commentator on matters of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean. So it's my esteemed pleasure to now hand you over to Dr. Sagewan, who will start us off. Dr. Sagewan, please unmute your mic.
There we go. There we go. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. So while I attempt to share my screen, I will say good morning to everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Sunil. It is my pleasure once again to be part of a Farrell and Associates conversation. And are you hearing me?
Yeah.
And I am humbled to be asked once again to share my thoughts today on Tobago. And I'm very, very pleased that we have shifted focus away from Trinidad and Tobago. So now, can you please keep me on a time check? I had to take my phone off because my camera system kept beeping on it. And so I don't have my own. So please keep me on a time check. I have quite a bit of information, but I will try to go through it as quickly as possible. And some things are just for supporting. So my task today is to share with you what the economic outlook and growth trends look like for the economy of Tobago. What I would be doing is looking at the economic context, the key economic indicators and performance. We look at the drivers of growth and the trajectory and projections going forward, some of the challenges and opportunities. And if I have time, I have done one slide that compares Tobago with Grenada, and I found it very interesting in terms of seeing what can be potentially a reality for Tobago if it depending on the kind of growth trajectory it positions itself into. And I need to just give you this view. Right, there we go. So in terms of generally, as we all know, Tobago is part of the Twin Island state of Trinidad and Tobago. It is very, very much linked to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. It is a country, an island that is 300 kilometers squared, very small. As we all know, we could go around Tobago in a day. Its administrative autonomy is governed by the Tobago House of Assembly, which has devolved powers, and most of the resources that is available to the TH actually comes through the national budget of Trinidad and Tobago, and you will see how very important and critical that is to the economy. So in terms of its economic structure, it is heavily service-oriented. We know tourism dominates, that's no surprise. There's limited industrial manufacturing base, although there is talk of a heavier focus in terms of diversification. There's limited agriculture happening, and there's a high import dependence, but that is much similar to the entire economy of Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the key challenges that the economy faces is vulnerable to whatever shocks the economy of Trinidad faces, Tobago faces. So some vulnerability, significant actually, to climate change, to pandemics, global recessions, oil and gas performance. So the economy is very vulnerable to these things. It's very vulnerable to its limited diversification. And if we get to the Tobago Grenada example, you will see what that looks like, and there are some significant infrastructural gaps that must be addressed if the economy is to move forward. So moving now to some of the performance indicators. Generally, we talk about GDP for Trinidad and Tobago as a whole, but when we separate out Tobago, Tobago really accounts for about 4 to 5% of the GDP of Trinidad and Tobago. And when we take it out on its own, the data that I have here shows you the gross domestic product for Tobago between 2022 and 2024. And this is post-COVID, and you will see that it realized a 2% growth in 2022, dipped to 1% in 2023, but recovered in 2024. Of course, this is revised and it's not confirmed, but certainly it suggests that post-COVID, there has been some slow returning to growth in economy of Tobago. If we drill down in terms of trying to understand where this GDP comes from in terms of its segmentation, what we see is that government comprises the major part of the GDP of Tobago, accounting for approximately 45%. So 45% of the value of goods and services that are produced within the economic space of Tobago is generated through the government. Second, interestingly, one may have thought it was tourism, but it's finance, insurance, and real estate services. So I think for your purpose, this should be very interesting. This combined three areas account for 26.9% of Tobago's GDP in 2024, and it hovers around that same for the entire period. So it's relatively fixed. Tourism accounts for approximately 14% of Tobago's GDP. And when we look at some of the other sectors, we see agriculture just 1%, manufacturing 0.2 of 1%, and all other sectors just about 6%. So it really points to the fact what I said earlier, the economy is not very diversified. It's very, very centralized in services, government, finance, insurance, real estate, and tourism being the major mainstays of the economy. And if we look at the budgetary allocation to Tobago, that now is very interesting. Tobago depends on Trinidad to allocate most of the money that it has available to it to meet both its recurrent expenditure as well as its development agenda. Tobago makes its request to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and then it gets an approved amount, which we hear every year when the national budget is read. But what is interesting is look at this column here. This is the kind of monies that the Tobago House of Assembly would be requesting on an annual basis, approximately about $4 billion. But this column here shows us what they actually receive. And on average, they receive about $2.5 billion. The shortage between what the House of Assembly determines it needs in order to manage and grow the economy falls short annually. And we see it has been decreasing, but 2022 is 50%, 2025, 34%. And you will see, look at the development, you will see if you look at the recurrent expenditure, most of the money that is gotten really is almost enough just to meet the recurrent expenditure needs of the economy of Tobago, with only about $200 million allocated to development. Now, economy can only grow if there is significant investment in a development program. And I thought it useful to kind of to look at the shortfalls so that the THA would have requested allocations by subheads. And when we look at it, look at where the major shortfalls are. It's in the development program, about 80% of what is requested for development is actually not given to the THA. And most of what is required for recurrent expenditure is actually met. So this is quite significant to note, and it sends a signal that Tobago has to find resources elsewhere in order to meet the very, very significant objectives it has set for itself, which I will go through. Now, if we look at the development program as well, we drill down a little bit more, you will see that the productive sector only gets about $1 million a year out of the budget, a shortfall of about 67%. Economic infrastructure gets a shortfall of about 81.3%. So these two indicators tells us that, Tobago is significantly constrained from a resource perspective to be able to push a growth agenda. This tells us what kinds of resources the THA has been able to get through taxes and non-tax revenue. This is outside of the national budget. And you will look at the figure on this last column here for the years, and you will see it's just about $200 million, which approximates, interestingly, to what the development budget is for the country. So, but when you compare what its needs are, according to the THA, they need about $4 billion. The country itself is only generating tax and non-tax revenue of about $200 million, which also interestingly approximates to the development agenda. So that, in a nutshell, really paints the most macro level picture of what is happening in Tobago from a governance and a management and a growth perspective. We look at the labor market, and what the labor market shows us is that unemployment in Tobago appears to be higher than it is in Trinidad and Tobago, although coming down. The figures I have from the THA most recent for 2023, it's about 2.1%. The labor force participation rate is 62%, which is quite good. It is higher than in Trinidad and Tobago, which is in the 50%, and that is something that we are very concerned about. But the labor force in Trinidad and Tobago, when you look at educational achievement, only about 16% of the labor force actually has attained tertiary level education. So, and you need a trained human capital population in order, again, to support a development agenda. So this is an area that needs to be looked at in Tobago. When you look at inflation has been between 2022, 2025, it has been coming down. It is about approximately, core inflation is about 2.6% at this point in time. Though when I go on to show you some data that I got on the cost of construction, and because you will see that prices in Tobago tends to be higher than Trinidad, than in the case of Trinidad. So this is some data that I was able to get, a study that was commissioned by the THA. And it shows a differential in terms of the cost of construction of a 3-bedroom and a 2-bedroom household in Tobago relative to Trinidad. And the findings are that in Tobago, for a 3-bedroom home, it costs 21% more to construct than it does in Tobago. And for a 2-bedroom home, it costs 20% more in Tobago than in Trinidad And then if we break down the data by construction component, you will see that the price differential ranges from 13% to 33% higher for construction material in Tobago than in Trinidad. And here is a diagram that gives a breakdown. I'm not going to go through it. You all have copies of it, so you can actually be able to see this. But I mean, I'm assuming for those of you, much of you are here, you probably are familiar with it. So again, the fact that the cost of construction is more expensive in Tobago than in Trinidad, it will obviously impact on the rate at which the real estate market can grow and the cost at which the real estate market can be made available to consumers. Now, I've been asked to talk about growth, and the issue of growth obviously is linked to the issue of the productive sectors of the economy. And in this instance, outside of the government and finance and real estate, the tourism industry is the mainstay of the economy. Government employs about 50-something% of the labor force, and the rest of the labor force is employed in tourism. So it is a significant generator of employment. So understanding what is happening in the tourism industry is very important if we are to understand growth in the economy now and moving forward. And I don't want at all to step on my colleagues' toes, so I am going to run through this data very quickly. So it's the main source markets for Tobago are the United Kingdom, Germany, the USA. This, I'm sure, is no surprise. And then I think CARICOM, particularly the Tobago market, would be probably the next largest element of this market. Now, the indicators we look at in order to see what is happening with the tourism sector is visitor arrival. And where you have a cruise industry, we look at cruise tourism and in terms of passenger arrival or ship arrivals. In this instance, I'm looking at passenger arrival. So for visitor arrival, you will see pre-COVID, it was about 126,000. Since then, well, obviously crashed in 2020, but since then has been recovering. In fact, in 2024, the estimated number of arrivals is about 100,000. What is important to note is we have still not yet reached the pre-COVID levels of arrivals of 126, whereas the islands around us have in many instances surpassed the pre-COVID figures for arrivals in Tobago. Cruise tourism, again, pre-COVID, it was about 70,000, but we see we are making strides. And in 2024, we actually surpassed that. This is 2025 so far. This is, if 2025 is missing, we have so far about 40,000, but we don't yet have data for obvious for November and December, which when added, we know actually whether the growth trend in cruise tourism is continuing. But I just want you all to note, cruise tourism is not the most, it is not the most rewarding, financially rewarding element of the tourism market for the Caribbean islands because the spend per passenger is extremely low. I don't have the data in terms of what it is for Tobago, but I imagine that it is probably one of the lowest in the Caribbean. And therefore, if Tobago wants to maximize that, it needs to do a lot of work in terms of looking at the products, the on-island products that can encourage the cruise passengers to come off the boats and spend in Tobago. So again, that's a whole discussion in and of itself. Now look at occupancy. The data that I have gotten from the THA suggests that overall occupancy, the overall occupancy rate for all types of accommodation in Tobago is about 38%. This is overall for the entire year, right? Of course, there are the peak periods like during maybe summer, during Easter, when it's probably closer to full capacity. But when you average out for the year, you see that this is the situation, which suggests that there is either capacity in terms of accommodation, maybe off-peak period, to do things that can bring people into Tobago. But again, that would require further drill down for us to be able to discuss. And the whole issue of airlift obviously will impact on this and mechanism through its persons to get to Tobago by other means. There is a tourism development plan in place. The objective of the THA is to, they have earmarked $150 million to be spent in 2026. They are hoping to move the contribution of tourism from 14% to 20% by 2030, which is good news. And there's all kinds of investment. Now, these are some of the initiatives that we know about. The new airport anticipated to bring in annually, to have the capacity to bring in 3 million passengers annually, but capacity doesn't necessarily mean actuality. So it is what will be done in order to actually bring this 3 million. And if you're bringing in 3 million people annually in Tobago, you have to have the accommodations and the facilities on island in order to be able to meet their needs. Now, these are some of the projects that are currently being supported. The Marriott Hotel, the Kilgwin Bay Apple Leisure Group project, 500 five-star hotel, renovation and the Mantle Lodge in Speyside, a 3 million water park facility in Friendship Estate. And the Town and Country Division has actually earmarked this range of estates as ideal for hotel development. So from a policy and institutional perspective, the Tobago, the Town and Country organization is sending the signal that these are areas that are ripe for potential investors. These areas have linkages to Europe, and therefore the anticipation is that Tobago is looking to position itself to bring in foreign investment, heavy foreign investment in the tourism sector, which I do not know it has any other choice but to do. There are incentives in place. Whatever incentives available to Trinidad is also available to investments in Tobago. These are two of them. the Tobago Accommodation Upgrade Project, the Tobago Accommodation Relief Grant, where grants are given to hoteliers, guest house for upgrade, for room repairs, etc. And so there are a lot of incentives. There's 10-year tax holidays. There are incentives to bring in everything that you need duty free. So there are quite a bit of incentives on the books in Trinidad and Tobago for investment in the overall in the tourism industry. So that is tourism. Now, some of the other areas that THA is focused on is one, light manufacturing and processing. So it has prioritized the issue of diversification and diversifying the economic basket that is the economy. These are the areas that it has identified as priority: garment production, leather craft, food and beverage, fish processing, agro processing, chocolate making, and root crops. And to support this, it has the Cove Eco-Industrial Estate and Business Park, which is located in Southwest Tobago. It has 2 factory shells for manufacturing activity, and I think there's also land space that is available to leasing. So this is a supporting infrastructure that has been put in place in order to support the development of light manufacturing in Tobago. I do not have data in terms of where Tobago is. All I can tell you is manufacturing in this moment contributes 0.2% to Tobago's GDP. So clearly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to realize this particular outcome. The THA also intends to focus on a digital economy, things like business process outsourcing, networking, software development, and some other sectors it intends to focus on is the orange economy, the creative arts, fashion, solar panel production, which I find an interesting one. And I do know that Tobago should really be looking there because, I mean, we can't really compete with China. So that one is a little bit, I'm not sure what the feasibility say about that. Recycling facility, certainly recycling is welcome, but we have to think about scale and, scalability. So some of the things, I think, in many of these things, I think we would really need to see the kind of work that has been done behind the scenes in order to rationalize whether these particular areas, certainly cocoa is a no-brainer because we are fine for cocoa, and I know that there is that in Tobago, so rehabilitating that particular aspect and moving into agro-processing, I think I can understand. Some of these I would probably need to see more information on. So that is where Tobago is in this moment. And in terms of going forward, its growth trajectory and projection, which is important if anybody's making investment in the real estate market, especially from an investment perspective. So in the short term, 2023 to 2025, the IMF projects growth of the Tobago economy to range between 3.5 and 4.5%, and expect that the key drivers will continue to be tourism and infrastructure investment. So government and tourism will continue to be major players. And if tourism is important, then obviously real estate is important. So that those two things will go hand in hand because there's a lot of initiatives and plans in place for accommodation development in all forms and fashion in Tobago in order to be able to support that 3 million persons that it expects and it wants to be able to eventually bring onto the country. In terms of the medium term, 2026 to 2030, the THA is projecting growth of about 2.5 to 3.5%. And in its projection, it is focusing on the blue economy, of which tourism is a critical element, renewable energy, agro-processing. And in the longer term, Tobago 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the target is to really achieve a 5% annual growth through diversification in the long term. So some challenges and opportunity, I think we kind of have spoken about them. Climate vulnerability, 80% of its tourism infrastructure is in the coastal zone, so that developing the tourism product going forward, being cognizant of this is extremely important. But if we look down at the opportunity, we see that because Tobago has 60% of Tobago is land forested, there are opportunities for ecotourism potential. So shifting away from the Sansi and Sun, more towards the ecotourism opportunities based on community-based tourism, using the land and the forest as the basis, is creates opportunity for Tobago moving forward. Back to the challenges: high energy costs. The cost of energy in Tobago is higher than that in Trinidad. So obviously, if you're looking at manufacturing, you're looking at agro-processing, that obviously pushes up your cost of production and your competitiveness. We talked about the issue of skills. The labor market is saying that they're having difficulties in terms of finding the skill set that they need in order to match their needs. So Tobago needs more, as I said, in terms of upgrading the quality of its human capital. And it, as I've shown you, it has limited fiscal space. Given the money, most of the money it currently gets, most of it goes to recurrent expenditure. It has very, very little left over for development agenda. Some other opportunities, again, the blue economy, renewable energy, digital transformation. And that really is my presentation in Tobago. But I thought it would be interesting for you to see what an economy of similar size to Tobago has been able to do. And I zeroed in on Grenada. Now, Tobago is 300 kilometers square in terms of size. Grenada is 344 kilometers square. So not much larger than is Tobago. But there are some differences. So if you look at labor population, Tobago is 60,000, Grenada is twice that at 126,000, which really sends a signal and something to think about, that Tobago in this moment potentially does not have the human capital that is required in order to propel its growth going forward. In terms of GDP contribution, obviously, Grenada is a fully sovereign, autonomous economy, while in the case of Tobago, it only contributes about 5 to 7% of the GDP of Trinidad and Tobago. It doesn't have the kind of autonomy in terms of decision making as does a Grenada. In terms of tourism dependence, Grenada is even more dependent on tourism than is Tobago. 52% of its GDP comes from tourism. But when you look at the tourism product, it is significantly more diversified and well developed than is that of Tobago. But what I hope you're seeing here is potential in terms of where the country can go. Visitor arrival, Tobago pre-COVID was 126,000. Grenada was 527,000, 4.2 times higher in volume than Tobago, sorry. In terms of post-COVID arrivals, by 2022, we had only in Tobago realized a 62% recovery, while Grenada was well on its way by achieving a 90% recovery. Now look at terms of diversification outside of tourism. Whereas in Tobago, agriculture is 1%, in Grenada, it's 6% of GDP. And look at this, unemployment in Grenada is significantly higher than it is in Tobago, but yet it is doing so much better. In terms of fiscal deficit, I think we're kind of on par. In terms of diversification drivers, Tobago remains very, very limited, while in the case of Grenada, it is much more significant. And really, I'm wrapping up now. So here, I brought these two things for us to see what is in Tobago and what potentially could be if a different and a more aggressive type of approach is taken. So in conclusion, Tobago shows resilience, but it faces structural challenges. It's a tourism-dependent economy that requires strategic diversification, and its sustainable growth hinges on climate adaptation and institutional reform. So that is my presentation. I hope that I have added value, and I am now available to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sagewan. Just to remind participants, or rather to mention to participants, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A section. You can also post them in the chat, but we prefer if you do it in the Q&A section so we can monitor it more efficiently. Our first question is from Petal Joseph. Petal is asking, what percentage of the tourism development budget is actually allocated for development? She believes much of it is usually allocated to the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited for marketing. Is this correct?
Okay, so I will be honest. I am not sure, but I know that the Tobago Tourism Association will get a large chunk of it. But what you will see, what the budget does see, what the information says in 2026 budget, the THA has allocated, is it 150? Let me go back to that particular slide. I think it's 150, 150 million dollars to drive tourism development. But you see, it's more important. It's a chicken and egg situation. Yes, Tobago is going out there and marketing, but you need to spend more money. And I think the THA recognizes this. I think they recognize the fact that greater emphasis needs to be placed on product development, on ensuring that the island is ready to be able to deliver when tourists come. I'll give you one simple example. I had a consultant here from Geneva, and she wanted to go to Tobago over a weekend and do to go to the Buko Reef. She booked it online and was charged $400 US for, well, it included being picked up at the airport, being taken to Sanders, still on the boat, come back and brought back to the airport. $400 US. Now, we all knew that that is a ripoff. So it is, what is the country doing from a marketing perspective to ensure things like these doesn't happen? Because when she went to Tobago and she realized what the true cost is, she felt really, really cheated. So, you know, the issue of infrastructure is important. Getting your tourism product right is important. And $150 million is really no kind of money. And the important point is that Tobago itself, the THA, through the monies it gets from the central government, doesn't give it any wiggle room at all. Its total development budget that it would have received in the last fiscal year was for productive sectors was one. Am I correct? Was 1 million? Was it? Go back to here. Yeah, was. Look, so in terms of the 2025, this was its development budget that it would have gotten. It would have gotten 100 million to allocate to all of its productive sectors, and tourism would have fallen into that. For economic infrastructure, 325 million US dollars. So it is a chicken and egg situation for the country. I think, you know what, this is wrong. It's 1 million, because if it's 323 million here, no, sorry, my bad. I'm looking at the wrong column, but it would have gotten $500,000 to allocate to the development of the productive sectors, $74 million for economic infrastructure. Really, what can be done with that? That is probably less than the Tobago Tourism Organization needs just to market tourism.
Yeah. Thank you, Indera. I see Chris has his hand up. Chris, you want to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to answer. Firstly, a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Indera. The money for TTEL, for tourism, marketing and airlift support is done by TTEL, as well as some of the product development. The Division of Tourism does most of the sites and attractions. So the money, as Indera has said, is very small. But unlike Trinidad, most leisure destinations have to support airlift. And a vast majority of the money that we have for tourism goes in that support for airlift. I just wanted to answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Indera, so just continuing with a few more questions as we have a little bit of time. Gerald is asking, in relation to past initiatives, like over the last couple of decades, do you think that any of those past initiatives or policies actually had an impact on growth in the real estate sector in Tobago, and should we resurrect any of them?
Well, we've certainly seen that there has been quite shifts, positive shifts in the real estate market in Tobago. If you look at, in fact, I suggested data is not available. I don't know if you guys have data, But if you go to Tobago, you will see that has been a significant development in terms of the availability of Airbnbs, for example. Homes for rent, really excellent quality infrastructure having been put in place. When you look at occupancy for the year, you see the occupancy is quite low. So there is one thing to put the infrastructure in place, which is being done. So I think whatever measures are in place in terms of incentives are certainly working in Tobago to encourage the investment in the real estate. But where the real estate investment is done as an investment, I do not think that people are realizing the returns that they expected to be realizing. And that would be linked very heavily to issues of airlift, of marketing, of bringing persons into Tobago, particularly on the off-season elements. So I think a lot of infrastructure, a lot of incentives are on the cards for real estate that is linked to tourism. I don't have the data in terms of the extent to which it is used and accessed, but I know that, or the bureaucracy that is involved in accessing it, but I know that it is there. One of the recommendations that I made to the THA recently is that it should do an inventory, an actual inventory of what it has on the ground in terms of, particularly in this area of guest houses / Airbnb. Because that, I think, is important for it to understand moving forward in terms of attracting more investment into the area. I hope that I have answered the question.
Thank you very much. And we have a few more.
Sure.
Are you aware of any loan incentives for private developers in ecotourism?
Loans, actual loans.
Yeah.
I am not aware. I know that there are these grants that I reference. I know if you are making an investment from zero, don't think there are actual loan investment. Chris may know better to weigh in here, but I know that there are incentives such as your capacity to get a 10-year tax waiver, your ability to write off your investment in a short space of time, your capacity to be able to bring in most of the materials that you may need for construction or for outfitting your investment.
You're correct, Indra.
Yeah?
There are no loan incentives, but there
Yeah.
are incentives for building a property. So you'll get a 7-year tax-free, and you'll get custom duties reductions on things that can't be produced here.
Sure. But also I want to add, if you have a property, for example, right? Let's say I have a house and I want to convert it into an Airbnb. You can actually write this off against your taxes. However, the thing has to be operating for at least 5 years. So your initial investment, you won't be able to write off. But once you are in operations for over 5 years, and at that point in time, you then make additions or renovations, you could actually get grants to do this. That's the more important point I wanted to make. There are grants available for you to be able to do upgrades to your Airbnb. So a grant does not have to be repeated. But again, I can't speak to the issue of the bureaucracy that is involved in terms of accessing it, but it's available on the books.
Yeah. In terms of, you had juxtapose us with, well, Tobago with Grenada. In terms of the data that is available, is there any data in terms of investment? So we have analysts talking about Tobagonians investing in the tourism industry. Do we have any data on that to compare?
You mean for Grenada?
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't have that. I would say from visibility, because I have done work on the tourism industry in Grenada, looking at alternatives, not so much the Sansi and Sun, but looking at alternatives like community-based tourism, agro-based tourism, etc. But what is evident is that Grenada has an infrastructure of the all-inclusive type of accommodation, which Tobago doesn't have. So that is one thing. And there is quite a bit of investment in small entities that I know are owned by Grenada. I don't have the data, but I could say that from actually visiting and interfacing with stakeholders, but I don't have data to be able to tell you. What I will say though is globally, the world is shifting more and more towards what is referred to as authentic experiences, communities tourism, where the tourists of the now and into the future, they want to come and they don't want so much the 5-star and the all-inclusive type of experience. They want to come and immerse themselves in the actual culture of the environment that they are in. Dominica, for example, is really positioning itself really well to be able to take advantage of that. They have a long, long way to go, but they have some initiatives there that are really about doing this. And I think Tobago, because of the smallness of the island, because of the vulnerability of the island, it is really well suited to this form of tourism. And a lot of work, I want to say, needs to be done in shifting the demand pattern away from the cruise, away from the all-inclusive, more in terms of ensuring that the people of the country are the ones who are the stakeholders in it, offering the services and being able, therefore, to enjoy the reward to it. I know it's a balancing act, I want to say, and therefore I do believe that there is a need for a few of the global brand names, because it brings with it the global marketing that we don't have to pay for. It brings the people. So I think there is the room to be able to balance it, but I think that should be the minority part of it, and the majority part of it should be more the authentic community-based part of it.
Yeah. So we have time for about 2 more questions, Indera, if you may.
Sure.
Can you say if anything is being done to develop human capital and training in hospitality to support the tourism sector in Tobago?
Not in this moment. I can say, I think definitively the hospitality school, I think in this moment is not functioning. I know that the THA has plans to revitalize it. They have plans for a university as well in Tobago. And I think there would obviously be a heavy focus in terms of that. But the absence of the human capital, and I think I've underscored that in my presentation, is a major, major issue that Tobago must address. If it wants to go, you can't grow your sector if you don't have the human capital in order to man it, or you will have to import it. And I mean, that is not the ideal situation. Even in Trinidad, I mean, we're Trinidad and Tobago, so we can look beyond Tobago and we can look at Trinidad in terms of what we do. We actually closed down the hospitality school in Chaguaramas, if you will recall. We used to offer quite a number of programs. It's no longer happening. And it would probably be ideally located in Tobago. So I think that should be a priority of any administration. But I also want to say that it is a particular challenge that faces many of the islands around us, not just Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay. And with respect to construction costs for homes, are you talking about standard size homes in the metrics that you had provided earlier?
Yeah, a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see there's some questions here that I might need to moderate, but would you say that there's a large percentage of the Tobagonian workforce employed by the THA and
Yeah.
associated bodies compared to in the private sector and tourist industry?
Oh, yeah, I made that point. Over 50 or close to 60% of the labor force is employed by government in Tobago, the THA.
Okay. So I
Yeah.
see we have some questions regarding.
Although I want to say, it is I don't think we could blame the country for that in this moment, because we don't have the kind of activity taking place in the private sector. I mean, I showed you, manufacturing is 0.2 of 1% of GDP. That tells you that there's not much happening there. Agriculture is 1% of GDP, not much happening there. And all of these new areas identified are new growth areas that there's the anticipation that we were going to go in that direction. So these are the future things that is being hoped to happen. The major chunk of the money that comes into Tobago comes from the national budget. The $2.6 billion comes from the national government to the THA, and therefore it is for the THA, therefore to use that. And yeah, so unfortunately, and most of it, 85% is spent on recurrent expenditure. Wages and salaries being a major part of that. So, but that has to shift. but that could only shift with, a lot of work needs to be done in order to shift that.
Yep. Right, thank you very much, Dr. Sajeevan. That was a very enlightening presentation, and you've got everybody quite riled up and into the debate. So I'm very happy that we started with you to really paint that broad context for us. So thank you very much, Dr. Sajeevan. You've always been very, very responsive and very on the ball with respect to the theme and the topic, dealing specifically with what we wanted to be addressed. Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Sajeewan. We would now move on to Mr. Chris James, who again is no stranger to us. He's a consultant in Tobago, past chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, past president of the Tobago Hotel and Tourism Association. Mr. James is also the regional chair of the Travel Foundation Tobago program since its inception in 2004. Through his voluntary work with the Travel Foundation, a British-based charity, Mr. James has made an outstanding contribution to responsible tourism on the island by helping to establish several sustainable initiatives that have increased the benefits of tourism not only to residents but also to visitors. Mr. James served on the board of the Caribbean Tourism Association for 4 years and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association as the Tobago representative for 2 years. He has been a member of various cabinet-appointed committees, including the Prime Minister's Standing Committee on Tourism, a former member of the Trinidad and Tobago Airlift Committee, and a past director of the board of the Tobago Hotel and Tourism Institute. Also on labor and tourism policy, standards, and various committees dealing with business, tourism marketing, and agriculture. He has represented Trinidad and Tobago and trade at numerous trade investment conferences. He was awarded in 2005 the Member of the British Empire Award by Her Majesty the Queen for his work on the environment and community work in Tobago and his British business interests. He has a bachelor's degree in gas engineering as well as an MBA in marketing and has worked for British Gas for 20 years. He has lived in the region for many years but has been a resident of Tobago for 30 years. He's presently serving as Senior Technical Advisor at the Department of Foreign Direct Investment at the Office of the Chief Secretary. Now, there were some questions raised for Indera that I left because I think that they would be better addressed by Mr. James. So for Petal and for Annalicia, I'm not ignoring your questions. I just think they would better be addressed in this session. So let me hand over to Chris to do his presentation on tourism and hospitality in Tobago. Chris?
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction. I just wanted to correct one thing that Indera said. The hotel school is open and offering courses. So anybody that's interested, it is open, it's working. I used to be on the board of the THDI, and I don't want it to be said that it's closed down or anything. It's working, and it is the only hotel school in Trinidad and Tobago. But I've also got a question for Indera to work on for me, some homework. Back in 2005, we had 88,000 international arrivals. Now, the figures that Indera was quoting were the local and international figures, the 100,000 figures she was talking. The beauty of the international guests is firstly the length of stay. The average stay used to be 10 days. Domestic tourists tend to stay much fewer days. So, Indera, when you have time, I would love to know what the GDP was for tourism back in 2005. And it's interesting that you mentioned Grenada, because one of the reasons we did so well in 2005, people will remember that in 2004, Ivan devastated Grenada, and we were doing a lot of shared flights. Virgin and Monarch flights were shared with Grenada. So we did very well that year on the back of that. Plus our figures were already high. We were already in the 66,000 international arrivals. So that would be an interesting GDP exercise to do for that year. The other thing about Grenada and why it is doing much better, Ivan was obviously a devastating blow to Grenada, but in the long term, it's turned out to be a very good thing because they've had to renew all the hotel stock, which we have not done in Tobago. So that is one of the reasons they are doing better. They improved all of their properties after Ivan, and the shared flights that we used to do no longer exist because they now have enough airlift. On the airlift question, the reason we are struggling with airlift is we do not have enough high-end rooms to make an airline profitable. You have to fill the front of the plane. And if we do not have enough of the high-end rooms to fill that front of the plane, we end up sharing with destinations like we do at the moment with British Airways, which we share with St. Lucia. And the Condor flight from Germany, we share with Barbados. They fill the front of the plane and we get the people in the back. So the aim of the Foreign Direct Investment Department within the Chief Secretary's office is to attract those high-end rooms so we can now get non-stop flights from destinations across the world and we don't have to share flights. That is becoming increasingly important because airlines, because of their green mandate, no longer want to do double drops. They're all trying to do non-stop. At the moment, the flights we have are called direct flights, even though they stop. You don't get off the plane, so they're direct. The non-stop flights fly to a destination without stopping once. One of the things that did not come out that has been a difficult and painful exercise for Tobago real estate agents. In 2007, October 2007, the THA requested that the government introduce a land license. Now that land license is onerous. I am told only 5 land licenses have been issued since 2007 for any foreign investor. So it's a real problem for foreign investors. The average time to get a land license, I was told, was 9 months. Most people will not wait 9 months and will go to places like Grenada. So that has been a tremendous problem for the real estate agents in Tobago. It also had a devastating effect on the property prices in 2 ways. I'm told the average property price dropped by 30%. This caused particular problems for hospitality accommodation because it brought their loan limit to the maximum they could borrow. So they were not able to borrow money to renovate their properties. So that 30% would have brought their loan limit down. Their property would be worth 30% less. Therefore, if they had a sizable loan, they were not allowed to borrow any more money. The average international arrivals at the moment are about 20,000, which is far below the 88,000 we were getting in 2005. The reason that's important to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is that some international guests are bringing in foreign exchange. Many years ago, 2005, 2006, the banks here would have problems with the foreign exchange because they're only allowed certain limits to maintain in their safe here. So they were sending down every day foreign exchange to Trinidad. So that is a real interesting phenomenon for this foreign exchange problem we're having in Tobago and Trinidad. And I think if we can get more first class rooms and we can get more flights that will fill this enormous airport we have, that there is no way that Tobago can ever accept 3 million tourists a year. It would just be impossible. But it's a beautiful airport. I think it's the most beautiful airport in the region. It's very big and we want to make full use of it. But we have a challenge in that we have to get those high class rooms into Tobago to make them work. We also need to look at the room tax. Again, it was talked about with the Airbnb. Properties of 6 rooms and under do not pay the 10% room tax. Neither do the Airbnb people. Now, that creates an unlevel playing field for most of the properties in Tobago, or the other properties in Tobago. It is my belief that we should follow what other islands have done and create all properties, because it would give us a legislative arm to make sure that whatever property is being offered for tourists is up to a certain standard. They could get the TTIC standard, which is the Trinidad Tobago tourism standard. And we could also use that 10%, as for instance Jamaica does, to help us with our spend. Because as I mentioned when I answered one of the questions, we need to support airlift as all other leisure destinations do. Grenada has to do it, Jamaica has to do it, we all have to do it. So a portion of that 10% could go towards that, a portion could go to marketing. And if we could elevate the number of tourists we get, we could even start a revolving loan for the smaller properties to upgrade. It would also give the smaller properties the ability to get those incentives, which I think is only fair. At the moment, they do not get the tax incentives for 6 rooms and under. And that would make it very easy to convert people to paying the 10% room tax. It would have no effect over the competitiveness of properties because it would be across the board. So I think it's something we should look at. Now, the land license itself also has another problem because the land license is issued to the person. Now, if I were to come here again for the first time and I was successful in getting a land license, I can only sell my property to a foreigner if they are given a land license. This is unlike any other island in the region. The land license is normally given to the property or the land. So this creates another problem when selling because the property devalues. We need to change this land license if it's needed at all, so that we get a resort license or a property license. Because, for instance, with the Tobago plantations set up with that kind of died after the land license was introduced. And there is no reason that whole resort, 750 acres of Tobago plantations, could not be given a license to just sell. Now, people used to talk about FDI and all the problems. We have FIU, the FIU process. There is no need for the land license process. If you look at the application form, it duplicates what the FIU does. And if we're all used to doing the FIU requirements now, so there is no need for that land license to be issued on a one-off basis. It should be issued on the property in perpetuity. That's my view. The other, I think somebody mentioned, I think, Sanal, I think it was you, the ease of doing business. In doing this job now and looking at what people have to go through to do business in Trinidad and Tobago, we have to simplify the town and country planning situation, the EMA process. It's putting a lot of people off. We have to streamline it. When I first came here 31 years ago now, they had what they called a one-stop shop, and it was exactly that. Everything stopped at that shop. There really needs to be a clear understanding of how we're going to do business in the future to make it easy for people to do business. I mentioned about the foreign exchange. If we really want to solve this foreign exchange problem, we need to get moving on this because we can be the solution to a lot of that foreign exchange problem in many ways. Tourism is used in many countries. Jamaica's the obvious choice to promote the destination and the culture and their goods. We never, as a destination, market our goods at the same time that we're marketing the properties. When we go to World Travel Market or ITB in Berlin, we go as tourism people. It would be much better if we had everybody that produces, manufactures anything that does a sideshow for that. So we used the tourism pull as our shop window. We also need to look at that value chain. We do need to do some more education and training. The value chain in tourism can be enormous. Agriculture, fisheries, the craft vendors. We can improve quality and improve job opportunity with all of that value chain uplifted. We need to show people. I think one of the things we fail at generally, and I think I've failed at with my time at the Chamber and the Hotel Association, is actually showing people the benefits of working for yourself and making a business. It's very big. It's been very difficult because, as you can imagine, the drop in tourism was so dramatic that people got very scared. And it's one of the reasons the employment in THA increased so much. So we need to improve that shop window. The other thing I just wanted to mention before I finish is we need to start working jointly with Trinidad if we are going to achieve everything we need to achieve, because there is a market for dual destinations. And I think we can promote and work together to do a lot more promotion in these things. There is an exciting event coming up next year. The main ridge in Tobago is 250 years old next year. It's the oldest piece of environmental legislation. And we really need to make the most of that opportunity. I think it's a big event. It's the oldest piece of environmental legislation, as I said. And we can get things moving. We need to start moving quickly because the market will not stand still for us. So Sonal, I've done most of my notes. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. We actually have some spillover questions from the previous session, which I left for you because I think you would be in a better position to answer those. But just to look back to your point on ease of doing business, I used to write for the ease of doing business report for the World Bank on registering property in Trinidad and Tobago. And
Right.
what made it easier for us to do that report was that we could copy paste information from a previous report. And what I noticed for about 5 years straight, nothing had to change. The same issues, the same lack of implementation of reforms, nothing had to change. Nothing changed over that time. And
No, so now let me just say one of the reasons I think a lot of people in these departments have a process to go through. They have a process to go through. I don't think we've ever educated everybody and talked to people, encouraged them to see the benefits for the greater, well, in this case, Tobago. If we show people that by doing things speedily and helping this process, your aunt or your uncle or your brother, your sister is going to get a job, then I think we need to start doing it that way. I know 30 odd years ago when I was in British Gas, we did a similar thing where people could not see the benefits of these great pipelines going through their community. So we went out and about to show them what benefits there could be. And I think I've suggested this before, but I think we really need to get everybody on our side. At the same time of if we do a manpower audit and show what we need, Indera mentioned like Marriott coming. I know of other properties that are coming. We need to do a manpower audit to say these are the jobs that are going to be available. Get people to understand that, okay, there's going to be these direct jobs in these tourism entities. But on top of that, we're going to need more bakeries. We're going to need more plumbers. We're going to need more air conditioning people. So I don't think we do a good job of that. The career development side of it may encourage people to in the public sector that do these town and country planning EMA could help. The other way we could do it, and again, Indra mentioned about the least and the small amount of money we get for development. The other way is to do it pre-sale and to actually get all properties that are tourism properties shovel ready. So they already have that EMA certificate. They already have their town and country. That would make my job easier because I could then go to an event and say, look, if you want to build a 100-bedroom hotel, this is the property for you.
yeah.
And everything would be there and done. But that's costly. That is a costly thing to do. We just do not have. Indra mentioned about the percentage of the budget. We tend to get just over 4% of the national budget. The DRC said we could get up to 6%. We've never got close to 6%. So if they want Tobago to develop, if central government and Trinidad Tobago wants Tobago to develop, then we need that development money to move things forward. And that's one of the things we could do.
Yeah. So one of the questions that came over from the previous one is that if we were to not look at mass tourism and consider more sustainable options, ecotourism, and alternative forms of tourism, maybe culinary tourism, how would this impact on Tobago? And do you think that this should be the direction that we take tourism in the future for Tobago?
You need all types. I'm glad somebody said culinary because I really want the hotel school to be an international culinary school eventually. I will keep pushing that because I think the food in Trinidad and Tobago is the best in the Caribbean, and I think that's one of the things we could do. But we need dormitories. The St. George's University in Grenada helps provide airlift to Grenada, so that's one thing. You can't pick and choose with tourism. Different times of the year are different types of tourists. I have this conversation quite often with people. There are lots of niches that you need to fulfill. We have diving niches, we have weddings, we have fishing, we have all of these different niches that all make up a certain percentage. And there are some people that want all inclusive. Now, the THA has to get that balance right. And all inclusive, what I learned through Travel Foundation, all inclusive doesn't need to be bad. If you instruct that all inclusive that they have to buy the majority of their goods locally, there is a knock-on effect there. So, but there are some people that will only choose, especially families tend to only choose all inclusive. But that can be a very small percentage of what we want. If you look at the figures regionally, the vast majority of people come for leisure. And there is a growing trend for adventure tourism. So that's something we can provide here. We have trails and bike rides and all sorts of things going on. Sports tourism is another one. Environmental ecotourism is misunderstood in many markets, and it can mean very different things to different people. But yes, we have it in Tobago. We have Castara's doing very well on an ecotourism basis. We have projects in the pipeline that would be eco. And yes, it's part of the mix, but to fill a plane, which is unfortunately, we have to consider how we're going to fill a plane. And that plane has to be filled up with all of those niches. And the percentage and it's one of the reasons I want the small properties to get the incentives. One of the concerns I have is if we get more larger hotels, and I'm not talking big, I don't think we'll ever get a hotel over 200 rooms in Tobago. But whatever we do, that small sector is also a growing sector. I think Indera mentioned it. There are a lot of people that want to go to that small sector, but to keep them relevant, we have to keep them up to par, and that's something we have to work on.
Yeah. When we look at occupancy rates in Tobago, and I've seen this in some of the previous hospitality reports, that averaging around 40%. Indira had mentioned that that figure from her observation or her review was around 38%. So one of our Tobagonian planners, Petal, is saying that Castara has a unique scenario where accommodation in that village tends to be pretty high, almost completely booked out. Is Castara doing something differently that the rest of Tobago can learn from?
Castara's, yes, they have created a village tourism market, and that is working. And it's not, they're not 100% all the time. It's the problem we've got is, again, that's a niche.
Yeah.
You could not have 5 Castaras in Tobago because you would just dilute Castara. So that's the challenge. You could have more. I'm sure we can create more, but you can't dilute that market. The challenge you've got with occupancy, it is because of the dependence on the domestic side. And don't forget, we've had real problems with the air bridge. We've gone from 22 flights to 12. We've lost 10 flights a day. So that's impacted dramatically. It's very strange. When I talk to Trinidadians, they're not aware of our problems. That has impacted dramatically on our domestic arrivals, and especially the higher end domestic arrivals. I constantly get told when I come to Trinidad, it's easier to go Grenada or Barbados than it is to get a flight to Tobago.
Yeah.
So I only have to land in Piarco to be told that 5 times. And if we want this to work, and we need the air bridge, we need Caribbean Airlines. It's supposed to be a national airline. We only have one flight from JFK, international flight from JFK to Tobago. All other international flights go to Piarco. I have, for the last 20 years, been trying to get an in-transit desk in Piarco to make it easier for tourists to come when they arrive in Piarco, whether they arrive in American or Cal or whoever they arrive on, to get to Tobago and not miss their connection. Because the other story I get constantly, I've had it this morning, people have to sleep in the airport overnight because they've missed their connection. Ease of doing business. We need an in-transit desk in Piarco so that people can get here easily. I'm hoping that this new airport will satisfy our needs and may even entice Caribbean Airlines to put some international flights into Tobago.
Yeah. And do you think with the I don't know if commissioning is the right word, but once the new airport finally is being used, that this would increase the volume of flights that are coming directly to Tobago, so they
Not in
won't have to
itself.
deal with that air bridge issue?
No, not in itself. It makes it easier for me because I can tell investors we're so confident of our future that this is what we have.
Yeah.
So what I'm having to do, because our figures are so bad in comparison, as Indra pointed out, compared with other islands in the region, our occupancy and our rate is very low. But I can always talk about the potential. You know, we're low, but we've got a great potential. the faith that because we have the airport, I can use that as a example of that potential. But no, without the high-end rooms, let me just explain how the airlift works. Just so you know, if we don't fill that front of the plane, it's very costly to support a flight. So you either do marketing support or seat guarantees. That can work into millions of dollars if you don't fill those seats. And we would not fill, and you've got to remember that the front of the plane is 70% of the profit of an airline is the front of the plane. The back of a plane makes very little money. But the front of the plane is where the airline makes the money. And if they cannot fill that front of the plane and we have to pay for those seats, it will become very, very costly. So it has to work in tandem. We have to get these new hotels, the higher end hotels, and it doesn't have to be hotels. Indra mentioned about the Airbnb. We can have high end villas and all of that. We have to market all of that. We just don't have enough of it at the moment to fill. If you can imagine 2 flights a week, ideally airlines like to come in twice a week for crew. So if you've got 350 people landing twice a week, then you've got a challenge if you don't have enough high-end rooms. Does that make sense? Oop.
Yeah.
I have no idea what this has just come up here. Okay, sorry, something came up on my screen.
What about tourism forms such as sport tourism or the yachting community as well? Do you think that this is areas that that can be explored?
Yes, sports tourism is massive. It's actually one of the larger niches because it's so varied and it's also different times of the year. So cycling and, like I said, the fishing, the game fishing type of thing, the sailboat. We desperately need a marina in Tobago. So yes, all sports is a very interesting one because it can fill quieter periods of the year. One of the reasons Carnival in Tobago is in October is because October was historically very poor.
Yeah.
It was a very poor time of the year, but we can move those events to fill in the slower periods. The beauty of having the domestic market of Trinidad is that they do fill the slower periods. If you talk to some of the destinations, Antigua, just before I came onto this, I was talking to somebody in Antigua, and they actually close for 3 months of the year because they have no visitors. So they open 9 months a year, close for 3 months a year. We could actually have year-round tourists because of the domestic market. But once you start listing the niches, the churches, there are the scouts and all of these different things, the youth groups. It's just a case of getting out there and marketing it. But before we do that, we need the airlift. And to get that airlift, you know what I said.
Thank you very much. We also have, I see Patel is raising some questions here that might cause us to. But in terms of environmental metrics, like carrying capacity factor and other sustainability metrics, how much do these really weigh into tourism planning? So when we're looking at planning for improving the sector, how much do we factor in the environmental concerns? I mean, I don't want to throw around words like sandals being built on a mangrove here, but but these things, of course, come to mind.
No, well, that's EMA's job
Hmm.
from a point of view of capacity. But no, as a destination, I mean, we have very few rooms compared with most destinations in this region. We have a lot more land available for development, and we also have much stricter environmental rules. Tobago people are very appreciative of their environment. We also have things like we're pushing now the green key so that properties actually operate through the green key model. So environmental management and environmental forethought of properties is critical. And I don't think, as I say, I don't think the Sandals, like you say, it's not worth 750 rooms was never going to work in Tobago, which is what Sandals was. I cannot see that we could ever have had a property of that size and supply that property. Because again, you've got to get the linkages. Not just the environmental is critical to keep the island pristine, but the other side of the environment is, I mean, we touched on it with agriculture. we want to try and supply as much of this chain of jobs in Tobago. And when I was at the presentation for the Sanders, and I sat next to some farming people, and we were just quantifying the kind of quantities they would have to produce, and it would be impossible. One of the things we did with the Travel Foundation was to have an adopt a farmer program, where a property would adopt a farming cooperative to supply as much as it could do locally. Whatever we could supply, we would. And that has a benefit for both Trinidad and Tobago. So no, I think environment will always be high on the agenda of Tobago development.
Okay, so I'll just take two more questions.
Oh gosh.
So I'm going to amalgamate questions from Luke and Deborah on training. So given that the airport is hopefully soon to be commissioned, do you know of any, is there an intention to offer more training in the areas of hospitality to the Tourism Hotel Association, to the members of the association? Is there anything in the pipeline?
I've seen recently I can't remember what they call it, like an agenda for courses at the school. The school needs to be supported. We need to get. There is no problem with anybody going to that school and suggesting courses they need. They have the ability to put courses on. So I know the courses are reasonably well attended, but we can do more. And I do go back to the manpower audit, because I think what we do need is a manpower audit to actually identify, because it's not only the school. We would need YTEP to step in to do air conditioning people and plumbing people and all of these things, woodcraft. So I think that manpower audit would set us in the right direction. I also think that we need to do training in other areas of service, not just hospitality, the banks, the shops, and things like this. So there has been some training programs going through. The TTAL had a program of customer service, but I think there's always more we can do. But plenty of jobs available, and I think we need to go to the school and or they can write to me and suggest courses, and I'll put it to them.
We have, I want to just quickly loop back to the Castara model, and I agree with you that's a niche market, but we also have multiple small villages in Tobago, Palatuve, Lansfamy, Bloody Bay, are all nice little villages around Tobago. Do you think that the Castara model, as Celeste is mentioning in her question here, that we can replicate that model in other small village communities?
You can, but you have to be very careful, because oversupply will kill one or the other if you're not careful.
Absolutely.
So going back again to the mix of tourists we want to attract, tourism is a multi-niche sector. And if it's like anything, if you overkill, in fact, it's something that we cannot be guilty of in Tobago, because we haven't overdeveloped. Some of the islands now are already having that problem. Some, and I won't call the names, but they are overdeveloped in certain areas and are realizing, and that's actually having a detrimental effect both on their occupancy and rate, but also on the survivability. And that is something we're not there yet in Tobago, but any increase in any model, any niche, has to be weighed up and discussed, because it can kill a market.
Yeah. Well, I saw one of the other, I think it was Petal who were mentioning the lack of public sector engagement when we really have these discussions, and how far those engagements really go. Yeah, it's really a challenge. So to wrap up, Chris, I have Nicholas asking a question here saying, what would you say, in your opinion, are the top 3 areas that THE should focus going into 2026 that would improve tourist arrivals in the short and medium term? Like if you had to choose 3 things that THE should focus on.
In the long, this is not an annual thing. In the long term, we need to encourage foreign direct investment for a few larger upscale hotels to fill the front of the plane, as I said. The second would be to get those aircraft. We can again, I just wanted to emphasize for the smaller properties and real estate people that are listening. Airlines, what they do, the way an airline works is they allocate seats through tour operators. So they will choose a number of tour operators that they want to work with, And those tour operators would come and look at the properties and allocate, they say, I want 20 seats. Once the airline gets to 60% of the plane, the cost of bringing that plane is minimal. If we don't get to that 60%, it's extortionate. Well, what that then means is that 40% of the plane will be going everywhere else. They will be going to the small properties that can't afford to do the marketing of the larger properties. So that's the balance. So more high-end rooms, airlift, and we need to get more people trained to fill those hotels and increase, I'm going to have 4, and continuous marketing.
No, thank you very much, Chris. This has again been a very exceptional presentation, and we have a lot of comments coming in the chat talking about how beneficial they found your information to be, Chris. So it's certainly well appreciated by our participants. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will now move on to our next presenter, who is Miss Oneesha Paul. Oneesha's legal training commenced in 2007 when she joined the firm Pauline Blanc de la Bastide and Jaslon as a paralegal in conveyancing practice and procedure in the preparation of deeds and other documents for various land and estate matters. She pursued her career in law while working at the firm, where she left in 2011 to attend the Hewarding Law School. She then returned in 2013 after being admitted to practice as an associate in the property and estates services line. She became a partner of the firm in 2022. Congratulations, Oneesha, and has been head of the firm's Shoguners branch since September 2016. She has gained vast experience in land law and probate practice, including but not limited to general care and conduct in drawing and completing deeds and instruments of conveyances, transfers, assignments, leases, mortgages, and so on. Oneesha, this is a very lengthy list of things that you have here. In other words, Oneesha does everything when it comes to land. She deals with every type of instrument, every type of transaction. She has also conducted several training sessions and seminars at various financial institutions. So we're happy to have her here conducting this seminar for us, as well as including public institutions, to share her experience and her expertise in conveyancing processes, such as the different types of instruments, estate planning, and including wills and other testamentory instruments. So we're very happy to have Miss Paul here. And I would say, as a little side note, and I hope this, as a little side note, my doctoral work is on land in Tobago, looking at land tenure. So it focused on family land in Tobago, where I looked at family land governance and how it impacts on land tenure in Tobago. So this is I'm looking forward to Oneesha's presentation very, very much. We also have some questions spilling over from Chris, which I left for Oneesha because I think it really falls into her area. So thank you very much, Ms. Paul, for joining us this morning. We're very happy to have you here. So I'll now hand the floor over to you. Just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A and not in the chat, because the chat tends to get busy and it's hard for us to find the questions from the chat. So please post them in the Q&A. Okay, so over to you, Ms. Paul.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lalu. So good morning to everyone and fellow panelists. I'm delighted at the opportunity to be part of the webinar, and I hope that my contribution would be helpful. All right, so the information would have been, I would have also gotten the assistance of Ms. Acacia Halley, who heads the firm's Tobago branch in conveyancing matters and estate dealings as well. So we start with, so this presentation deals with the legal and regulatory landscape in Tobago, right? The screen is supposed to share, right? So we can go on to the next slide now. So I'm going to touch first on a bit of the 2 types of systems that exist in the island of Tobago. We have the island of Tobago, similar to its sister isle of Trinidad, uses a dual land ownership system consisting of the following. You have the common law system, which is sometimes known as the old law system. And then you have the registered system governed by the Real Property Ordinance, now known as the Real Property Act, Chapter 5602. Next. We have Reshma, who's sharing the slides for me. Just to go a bit into the history of it, the common law system, also known as the old law, as it was the first system that was introduced, was inherited from the British during their colonization of the islands of Trinidad and Tobago around 1800. By the 18th century, when British control over Tobago solidified English land law principles, including its tenure, estates, and inheritance, as when it was introduced. Over time, the system has been modified and is governed by the Law of Property Act 1925. Land ownership and various assurances of title are recorded through deeds and registered at the Registrar General's Department of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs today. Under the common law, the title to land was not guaranteed by the state and was traced using a chain of devolution of title in the deeds registry at the Registrar General with a statutory commencement of 20 years under the Conveyancing Law Property Act, Chapter 5601, being the period of commencement of title a purchaser requires. That's when title searches are conducted by an attorney at law once you're doing purchasing property in either of the islands. However, over time, land records were often incomplete, damaged, or never properly registered. And one of the main issues that presented itself in common law landholding in Tobago was multiple family members inheriting undivided shares of land without proper legal title ownership and partitioning, which affected its marketability and saleability. These problems highlighted the need for a more secure and efficient system, which introduced the registered system of landholding under the Real Property Act, Chapter 5602. Next slide. So this is where we introduce now the Real Property Act. This is the second system, the registered system of landholding that exists in Trinidad and Tobago. So Trinidad and Tobago enacted the Real Property Ordinance, the precursor to the Real Property Act, in 1946 to address some of the issues highlighted above. The Act was modeled on the Torrens title system first developed in South Australia in 1858 and was designed to simplify land ownership by providing a single indefeasible estate. Some of its key features are the title to real property was guaranteed by the state. Ownership and title interests were recorded on a single document called a certificate of title as evidence of property ownership. All transactions relating to the property are recorded or endorsed on the back of the certificate of title. It provided indefeasibility of the title with the registered owner's rights were difficult to challenge except in cases of fraud. The process of transferring title was simplified as it removed the need to review deeds from 20 years and older to approve the title. Instruments denoted by memoranda of transfer of title for the relevant concern is governed by the Real Property Act, which is the legislation that you have there. The endorsement of transactions on the certificate of title, which is what COT stands for, can take approximately 3 months. In some instances, it could take longer. Tobago has been in more of a need for the registered system of landholding to introduce a more secure title system for the following challenges which pose concerns. One, it has a more fragmented landholding system, often with multiple informal chains, leading to issues in certifying or passing title for land dealings. In some instances, where families reside on land, there is no clear survey showing demarcation or partitioning of the land. Many families held land without clear documentation, no administration or probate of estates of deceased persons, leading to an absence of established legal title for land ownership to facilitate a proper legal transfer. We found too that in the northern and windward parts of Tobago, there are persons who reside on lands for more than 16 years without legal title, and they have taken no steps to regularize the lands by bringing same under the registered system of the RPA. Next. Next slide. We have now other challenges that affect Tobago lands. So because there is no clear legal title and demarcation of lands through a survey, it sometimes results in ad hoc building and construction on land that affects the ability to obtain town and country planning and development approvals. Hilly and sloping areas such as in Bell Garden, Delaford, Speyside, Charlotteville may be affected in obtaining town and country planning approvals for building and construction due to the topography of the land, and the infrastructure to obtain planning approvals may be costly. A large portion of Tobago is deemed agricultural, and persons may have difficulty in converting these lands to residential, such as in Louisdore, Goldsboro, and Richmond. With agricultural lands, there's no permission for domestic building, and sometimes there is a difficulty in obtaining the change of use to allow for residential accommodation. This leads to families living on the lands without any statutory planning permission and without title documents to support partition, which can affect the economic development of lands. So once you are interested in property, and title searches is one aspect that has to be done. You also have, if you are taking a portion from a larger parcel, it has to be partitioned, and you have to get relevant approvals. But in instances where you have several houses on a single land lot, that could affect or pose a challenge for getting these relevant approvals. We have when Storby, following the compulsory acquisition by the state, it was evident that some families had more than one dwelling home constructed on 5,000 square feet of land, which contravenes general planning development, as Town and Country Planning Division permits one dwelling house on an area of land measuring 5,000 square feet. Next. So, what are some of the effects of these challenges? Without proper legal title to facilitate a regularized movement of ownership, leading to informal land occupation, it affects the land market, restraining the saleability and marketability of lands, and therefore negatively impacting the economy of Tobago in this regard. So if you have issues with the title, particularly where we have found with Tobago titles, families who have lived on lands for several years, there's no movement by sales. And without there being movements by sales, when we do title searches, and you have to go back 20 years or so far back as is necessary to find what is in law called a conveyance, which is where monies are paid for the purchase of property, or mortgage, where you use the property as security for financing. If the situation in terms of tracing how the title has moved is simply families owning it, then a purchaser, bona fide purchaser, who goes to an attorney at law when the searches are conducted would not find that good root of title that is needed, and therefore that would affect the land being able to move in that way and by that impact the economy of Tobago. In the absence of proper planning approvals, the development of Tobago can be impeded, and the lack of proper infrastructural development can pose a threat to residential communities and their environs. Next. So we have possible recommendations to issues. As it relates to title issues for lands, it is recommended that the lands be brought under the Real Property Act, where the title is indefeasible and assured by the state, because under the Real Property Act, or Registered System of Land Holding, title searches, the way the title searches are done, it's not the same as under the common law system, where you would have to find what in law we look at for a good root of title. You're simply examining the certificate of title, tracing the history of it on what is on the certificate of title, and that settles the title when it comes to registered land holding. For matters affecting the development of lands, it can be perhaps considered that discussions be held with the Town and Country Planning Division under the Ministry of Planning, Economic Affairs and Development, with a view to addressing issues on a case-by-case basis. Next. So we move now into types of proprietary rights in Tobago. So landholders in Tobago with an estate in land can have one of two types of proprietary rights of some particular duration. One is freehold and the other is leasehold. Next. So we're going to talk first on the freehold estates. In freehold estate, in which the term fee simple is utilized, the word fee denotes, one, that the estate was an estate of inheritance, which on the death of the tenant was capable of descending to his heir, and then two, that the estate was one which might continue forever. So a fee simple estate comprised the right to use and enjoy land permanently without any limit to one's ownership. The estate is perpetual and the owner has the full rights of possession, use, enjoyment, and transferability, subject, of course, to any statutory developmental planning regulations. Next. Leasehold estates now. So at first, the estates of freehold were the sole estates recognized by law. The only other lawful right to possession of land was a tenancy at will, under which the tenant could be ejected at any time, and which therefore gave him no estate at all. Terms of years or leasehold estates developed later. The distinguishing characteristic of leasehold estates and freehold estates is that the maximum duration of leasehold estates is fixed in time. Sometimes the leasehold estate is referred to as a term of years, and the leasehold estate can be carved out either from a freehold estate or from an estate with a longer duration. Leasehold is especially common in state developments and along coastal tourism areas where the government retains control. Some areas of leasehold land in Tobago can, which is what I found just in making inquiries. Housing schemes such as in Calder Hall, created by the THA for residential development of the island. We have tourism zones in Pigeon Point, Crown Point, Mount Irving, Grafton, mainly comprised by guest houses and resorts. And you have the agricultural type lease estates located at Bell Garden, Goldsboro, and the Wynwood farming districts. Next slide. So we move now into the process of purchasing property in Tobago. So when purchasing land in Tobago, there are general and regulatory requirements. One should first identify his or her property of interest based on purpose or intended use, and where applicable, an inquiry into the land's zoning and land use restrictions with Town and Country Planning Division in Tobago must be made. Secondly, you enter into an agreement for sale, which would bind negotiations between a willing seller and a ready buyer and set out any conditions, including financing, land approvals, land surveys, or even licenses, which is a pre-requirement for non-nationals. Following this, it is advisable that an attorney at law be retained, who will then conduct title investigations at the Registrar General's Department to verify title ownership and check for any encumbrances, judgments against the owner, or list pendants affecting the land. If the boundaries of the property are uncertain, then a licensed land surveyor should assist in confirming the exact location, dimension, and boundaries of the land. Due diligence should be conducted as well in examining title documents, the need for any statutory building or developmental approvals, and evidence of payment of rates and taxes being up to date. Once the sale is finalized, the relevant title document for the particular system, that being either a deed or memorandum of transfer under the common law or registered system respectively, is then signed by the contracting parties. Stamp duties are then paid, calculated based on the use and value of the land or property, if same comprised land and building, being residential, commercial, or agricultural. And then the last step is the title document is then registered at the Registrar General's Department for public record, right? Next. What are the documents that would be required for the purchase of property? In all land transactions involving the sale of property, parties are first bound under their negotiations by an agreement for sale, which requires offer, acceptance, consideration, and an intention to create legal relations to be binding. In some instances, to ensure the contracting parties are certain of their roles and functions, an agreement for sale can contain the following: their names, the consideration for the property, which is the selling price, the address of the property or a schedule describing same with its size and boundaries, the documents required by the seller to ensure the property is free from all encumbrances and charges, including rates and taxes levied, and the provision of a WASA clearance certificate. The rights and responsibilities of each party, stakeholder clauses setting out stakeholders' responsibilities and liabilities. That's under agreements where you do not pay the deposit to your seller or your vendor, but rather an independent third party who would hold it pending completion of the transaction or sale. Then you have the last thing would be your completion date of the contract. Next slide. Documents required for purchase of property. So this is a continuation. So after you have entered into your agreement for sale, the ensuing step is to conduct title searches using an attorney at law. Once completed and the title to the property is found to be good and marketable, the following documents shall be required. 1 is the WASA bill and receipt for the last quarter. 2, land and building taxes paid up to 2009. Ensuring the assessment number is the same on both WASA bill and land and building taxes, and where it differs, inquire at the District Revenue Office to validate the different assessment number gives the property's origination and its current assessment record. Your WASA clearance certificate, which must be no more than 6 months old. I think in some instances, some places say 3. Evaluation report of no more than 6 months older to date, because one of the requirements once title passes is to have your deed stamped at the Board of Inland Revenue, and evaluation report would be required. Completion certificate issued by the Tobago House of Assembly, Public Health Services Department for properties comprising house and land where applicable, because if the structure is over 4 years generally, it would not be required, but we do have 1 or 2 instances where it may be asked for. Final approval by the relevant governing authorities under the THA for land-only properties. Then you have 2 valid forms of national identification of the seller and the purchaser, utility bill for proof of address of the purchaser's BR file number, source of funds must be provided by either a bank statement or a letter from the bankers confirming the monies were withdrawn from an account in the name of the purchaser. This here is requirements under the FIU. In instances where a purchaser is a first-time homeowner of property comprising residential house and land, provision has been made for an exemption on stamp duty up to $2 million, and the following additional documents would be needed by the Board of Inland Revenue. 1 is an original letter from the financial institution that the purchaser would have taken the loan from, stating that he or she is a first-time homeowner. And the second is a statutory declaration sworn by a commissioner of affidavits, also stating that he or she is a first-time homeowner. If properties are leasehold, you have additional documents being the lease rent receipt, maintenance receipt, and if there's a management company, the original share certificate. Next slide. We move now into developing land in Tobago, the permissions and approvals. So to develop land in Tobago, you must apply for planning permission from the Town and Country Planning Division, obtain your necessary approvals from other agencies like the EMA and the THA. The process involves submitting plans, location plan, survey drawings, and the Town and Country Planning Division will also forward your application to the appropriate local authorities for their review and approval. So to just condense it into a step-by-step approval process, you first obtain planning permission, you prepare, and then you submit relevant plans, and then the THA would then consult with the relevant agencies under its authority to obtain the relevant approvals. Next slide. Completion certificate. So this is where there is a building that has been constructed and you need to provide a completion certificate. So upon completion of construction of the building, to obtain a building completion certificate, you must submit the approved building plans and other necessary completion certificates from WASA, Fire, TNTech, where applicable, and any other certificate depending on the scope of the work. In some instances, one may also need a certificate from the EMA. These certificates are necessary to ensure the building is fully constructed in accordance with the approved plans submitted to the Division of Infrastructure. A site inspection will then be scheduled with the building inspector to verify compliance with regulations under the building, its layout for drainage, any aprons around the building is constructed in accordance with the set plans before the certificate can be issued by the Division of Infrastructure. Next slide. So you would have heard about the THA by the panelists before and even earlier on in the presentation. So I'm just going very briefly into what its role is. It's a statutory body and it's created under the Tobago House of Assembly Act 1980. It was implemented to allow Tobago the authority to formulate and implement policy on matters referred to it by the minister and to preserve the unitary statehood of the Twin Island state. Section 25(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, together with the 5th schedule in relation to Section 75(1) of the Constitution, sets out that any responsibility given to the THA pursuant to this section must be subject to the overriding and overarching national policy directives of the Cabinet of the Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. It gives the THA the responsibility to implement policies that are consistent with that of the government in instances where the government already has a policy in place. Similarly, the THA does not have that responsibility where it may frustrate or hamper the implementation of government policy. Next slide. It plays a central and crucial role in regulating land ownership and development in Tobago, and its responsibilities intersect with property purchases in several ways. One, under land use and planning. The THA, through its Town and Country Planning Division, controls the zoning, land development, and subdivision approvals. Secondly, any land purchase must comply with zoning regulations such as residential, commercial, agricultural, and protected or coastal areas. They can approve or deny applications for building permits or land development on purchased land. Secondly, you have leasehold land management. So for leasehold or state lands in Tobago, the THA manages these lands and issues leases to individuals or companies, where the THA sets the terms of the lease, including covenants, the rents to be paid, terms for renewal, and also consents to assignment of leasehold interest. So sometimes under leasehold schemes, there is a requirement that if the title is moving from one person to another, you get the consent, the written consent of the lessor. And then thirdly, for non-nationals, the THA provides recommendations to the Ministry of Finance regarding suitability and compliance with local policy, and also provides local input in zoning, environmental impact, and land availability. Next slide. We move now into foreign investment, which was touched on by Mr. Chris James and Dr. Sagewan as well in their earlier presentations. So unlike our CARICOM neighbors, Barbados and Jamaica, where foreign investment is regulated through the central bank by administrative mechanisms, and there are no statutory limits on the size of land acquired, foreign investment in Tobago is regulated under a legislative framework, the Foreign Investment Act, Chapter 7007. It allows us to develop the non-oil sector of the Twin Island Republic and balance the constraints in facilitating foreign investment, and at the same time preserve or safeguard the patrimony of the citizenry of TNT from an invasion of the fabric of the local community. One of the benefits of the implementation of a legislative gatekeeper for foreign investments is that it safeguards against the prospect of pricing the local community out of their ability to afford to buy property for themselves in their own place. And additionally, it allows CARICOM citizens to invest on equal terms with locals. I think Mr. James would have mentioned in his presentation that since only 5 licenses have been issued, we can go on to the next slide. Under foreign investment. So who is a foreign investor? A foreign investor would be either an individual who is not a national of Trinidad and Tobago or another member state, or a firm, partnership, or unincorporated body of persons of which at least 1/2 of its membership is held by persons who are not nationals of TNT or another member state, or any company or corporation that is not incorporated in TNT or another member state, and if so, incorporated is under the control of persons to whom the 2 paragraphs earlier apply, or is deemed to be under the control of a foreign investor in accordance with subsection 2. You have the Foreign Investment Tobago Land Acquisition Order 2007, legal notice number 53 of 07, which requires all foreign investors to obtain a license before purchasing any land in Tobago, regardless of the size or intended use. The order is a crucial part of the process for non-nationals who want to acquire property on the island. Purchase agreements by foreign nationals should be subject to the purchaser obtaining a license, and the transactional costs are the same as in Trinidad. The need for a license was introduced on February 16, 2007, and the purchaser must be within designated development areas. In the Foreign Investment Act, the purpose of the license is to monitor the particular activity and the holding of the land for that purpose. By legal notice number 53 of 2007, all foreign investors seeking to acquire an interest in land in any part of Tobago, regardless of size, must obtain a license prior to such acquisition. Next slide. What are some of the key requirements for foreign investors in Tobago? So 1, the license is mandatory. Unlike in Trinidad, where smaller land purchases are exempt, a foreign investor must obtain a license for any land acquisition in Tobago, even if it is a small parcel for residential purposes. The license is required for any land acquisition in Tobago by a non-national under the Foreign Investment Tobago Land Acquisition Order. The payment must be in an internationally traded currency and transferred through a bank or an authorized dealer. The license to purchase land does not confer residency rights. If a foreigner inherits a property in Tobago, they must apply for a license within 1 year to retain ownership or place the property on the market for sale. It is a buyer or inherited owner who is licensed and not the property. I think this point was also made by Mr. James in his presentation. Next slide. We move now into the designated development areas. So to further encourage foreign investment, the THA, in consultation with the Tobago private sector and with the approval of the Minister of Finance, Trade, Planning and Development, has identified several designated development areas which are listed below. We have Arnorsvale and Culloden Estate, we have Baculet, we have Buku and Golden Grove Estate, Englishman's Bay, Lowlands and Diamond Estate, and Mount Irving and Grafton Estate. Next slide. These are the areas in Tobago earmarked for tourism-related development that has been approved by the THA. The THA may, in consultation with the Tobago private sector and with the approval of the Minister of Finance, designate additional areas for tourism development as considered necessary. The list of approved designated areas will at all times be made available via the Ministry of Finance and/or the THA. The Act further provides that the consideration for land acquired by a foreign investor shall be paid in an internationally traded currency, except in the case of a company incorporated in Trinidad and Tobago, where such consideration is financed out of capital reserves or retained earnings. Applications for foreign investment in Tobago may be submitted directly to the Chief Administrator, Tobago House of Assembly, called the Whole Administrative Complex, Scarborough, in Tobago. And when making that application, all required documents to the application should be attached, and applicants are required to provide any additional documentation that may be required by the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, or the THA during the examination process. Next slide. What are the regulations for these designated development areas that were identified or listed earlier? So to encourage foreign investment, the THA, with approval from the central government, identified specific designated development areas for tourism-related projects. So you have where you can get an automatic license. So for purchases within these areas, a license is more readily granted, provided the buyer passes a proof of good character check. When application is made for a police certificate of good character, and overseas applicants can apply via the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service or consular channels. Then you have a discretionary license, which is outside of the designated development areas. And for purchases outside of these areas, the license application is considered on a case-by-case basis. Next slide. The licensing process and its challenges. So we have the application process, where applications for a license under the Foreign Investment Act must be made through the Ministry of Finance. The Tobago House of Assembly Chief Administrator gives recommendations to the Ministry of Finance as the first point of contact for local assessment. Under conditional contract, you have where real estate experts recommend that any sale agreement entered into by a foreign national be made conditional on receiving the foreign investment license. So I know that earlier, it would have been stated that one should get the license before. So if you have a situation where your seller does not mind holding the property for you, then of course, sure, you get the license first. But if it is that the property is marketed, there are other competing buyers, then you would want, and you enter into that agreement for sale, then it is important that you make obtaining the license a condition of the agreement. Process delays. Historically, the application process has been described as lengthy, which can take several months up to a year, and investors have cited these delays as a deterrent to foreign investment. Next slide. Required documents for license application. So the following are typically required as supporting documentation for a foreign investor land acquisition license application. So 1, the applicant's passport when incorporating documents for companies. 2, his or her proof of address and nationality. The purpose and intended use of the land. Sale agreement, contract, or draft agreement for sale. That's for those where the agreement is being entered into at this time. Of course, a title document by either a deed under the common law or certificate of title under the registered system for the property, which your seller would provide. Evidence of payment or intended payment of purchase price in internationally traded currency through an approved financial institution. Detail the particulars of the transaction, including full name and address of both the seller and the buyer. All planning permissions or development approvals already obtained. Professional legal assistance is strongly recommended for document preparation and application management. And of course, you can see the Ministry of Finance for any further detailed requirements. Next slide. So we have now, after the license has been granted, the following matters are considered for completing that purchase of property in Tobago. So you retain a local attorney to perform your title searches, after which, once the title is found to be in good order, then the deed is drafted between the buyer and the seller, and the transaction is managed. Following completion of the transfer of title, the deed is then stamped by the Board of Inland Revenue. And then lastly, the deed is registered at the Registrar General to put the transfer on public record. Next slide. So this is a compilation of the stamp duty exoneration. So stamp duty applies to deeds, rates and exemptions on the Stamp Duty Act and the Inland Revenue Division guidance. So residential land, you're exempted from stamp duty up to $450,000. Of course, you have to provide the relevant document from the THA stating that the land is approved for residential use. If the value or the selling price, whichever of the two is higher, is more than 450, it goes in different tranches. So 450 to 650 is calculated at 2%. Over 650 up to 850, it's booked at 5%. And then over that threshold, it's 7%. For non-residential land, that's agricultural or commercial, it's a flat 7% rate. Residential land and building, first-time homeowner, you're exempted up to $2 million. Of course, you must provide your declaration that you're a first-time homeowner. And if you're taking financing from a bank, the letter from your institution stating this as well. Over 2 million, but up to 2,250,000, you pay 5%. And where it crosses 2,250,000, the additional rate is 7.5%. For residential land and building for persons who are not first-time homeowners, you're exempted up to $850,000. Between $850,000 and $1,250,000, you pay a rate at 3%. Between a rate of $1,250,000 and $1,750,000, you pay 5%. And then over that $1,750,000, it's booked at 7.5%. If the building is not residential, then that's a flat rate of 7% across the board. Next slide. Professional and typical costs. So you have apart from stamp duties, you have attorney's fees that would be paid. You have surveyor fees that would be necessary if you have to conduct a land survey, valuation costs, because you have to get a valuation report, and then due diligence costs. Bank legal fees for international transfers, stamp duty we mentioned earlier, and registration fees. And then budget for planning, EME studies if development is planned. Next. Payment and foreign currency regulations. All purchase monies and transactions involving non-nationals must be paid in internationally traded currency and transferred through an authorized financial institution, typically a commercial bank in TNT. Even in transactions where both purchaser and seller are overseas, the payment of the monies must be through a local bank, as this forms the basis of the transaction being deemed a foreign investment. Proof of such payment as a statutory requirement for completion of the Foreign Investment Act process and must be included in the license application. Exceptions are rare and apply only as allowed for certain corporate transactions, example, use of capital reserves within local subsidiaries. Compliance with exchange control and anti-money laundering provisions policed by the FIU and Central Bank is also strictly enforced. Next slide. So step-by-step process. So you firstly confirm the subject property being purchased, and you request a copy of the title deed or instrument of transfer from your seller. You then engage a local attorney at law to conduct your title investigations. You commission a licensed land surveyor to verify boundaries and confirm the size of the property if that becomes applicable. You ensure your property has the proper legal access to and egress from a public road or a private road with the relevant expressed right-of-way granted, which will be determined by your attorney at law. Prepare and submit foreign investment license application. Wait for license approval before signing agreement for sale or transferring funds. Or if you enter into the agreement for sale, you make the obtaining of the license a condition of the agreement. And then after all of the above, the deed is executed, stamped at BIR, registered for public record, and then you obtain planning building permits for development. Next slide. Tips. Always use written confirmations from the Town and Country Planning Division, the EMA, the THA for specific permitted uses. You engage a local attorney familiar with the process to guide in the preparation of your forms, confirm licenses, and register your deeds. You get professional licensed land surveyor and environmental engineering reports if developing, and of course, retain a bank for cross-border payments. Yeah, next slide. And that's it. Of course, the information that has been shared is general knowledge or general information. It is not intended for any specific advice. In any instances, you must retain an attorney at law to assist any particular transaction. Yeah,
Thank you very much, Ms. Paul.
questions? Thank you.
I think that has been the most comprehensive presentation um, on the license in Tobago I've ever seen. So you really covered everything and more. So we really thank you for that. There are some questions on it, which I believe you addressed in your presentation.
Yeah,
Um,
I see. Oh, it's a legal framework regarding.
yeah, so what I would do instead, with respect to the licenses, I want to put it to you as what is your opinion in terms of how that process can and should be improved?
I mean, I think in terms, if we're thinking improvement, we have to look at it from the broader prospect in terms of why it is how it is, right?
Mm.
And in the presentation, we've mentioned that, I think the idea is not to open it up for, or rather to make it entirely easy for foreign investment that could affect pricing and purchase, the ability of it being purchased by even locals, right? So it is lengthy. I understand that the administrative process in any government office is lengthy. So I think maybe conversations could be had with the ministry in terms of how the administrative process could be curtailed, for instances where the license has been or will be granted in the relevant designated area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Staying on that topic, I'm just going ahead to questions so that we stay on this topic.
Sure.
Is there a limit to the amount of land a foreign investor can purchase?
I have not seen anything in terms of the limit with respect to Tobago. I think that, they provide the plans and the ministry would then make that determination based on the location.
Okay. And are CARICOM nationals considered foreign investors?
No, no,
Okay.
no,
Okay, so they
they're
don't
not.
require a license.
No, they don't.
Okay, great. So I think that's everything we have with respect to that. So let me move on to some other things. Do you know how much land in Tobago is still considered state land?
No, I am not aware of how much of it is really state land at this point in time.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have it in terms of a percentage in relation to the area of land in the island,
Yeah. All right. I'm just skipping ahead to some questions because I see one that I think should be at the end.
See.
In terms of stamp duties,
Mhm.
hold on, that was addressed. Does the first-time homeowner exemption apply only to locals, or does it also apply to foreign nationals?
Well, the declaration indicates when you sign the declaration, it states that you have to declare if you own land in Trinidad and Tobago anywhere else in the world. That may be something I may have to look further into. But I think that you should be able to get the exemption because the declaration form does state if you own land in Trinidad and Tobago or anywhere else in the world. So I think that you should be able to get the exemption, but I could look further into it and get back to that participant.
And what about Tobagonians who are living abroad? Do they require a license to,
No,
okay. Yeah, I thought so.
because they're nationals.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When when you need the completion certificates to complete a transaction, does that apply to all properties? What about properties that are already constructed?
So once it has crossed the 4 years under the Town and Country Planning Act, generally, the completion certificate would not be a requisition to complete a transaction generally, once it
Mhm.
crosses the 4 years.
Okay. I have a very interesting question from Andrea here, which I would like to know myself. She's asking, payments through a local bank, will this
Mhm.
mean that Forex is converted to TT and then converted back again for the vendor? She's saying that the losses because if you have to factor in conversions from buying rate and selling rates, you're going to
Yeah,
have a loss. So,
correct.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is definitely something to consider. Well, before I get to Edgar's question, because Edgar's question really is a summing it up all up kind of thing. Let me put a
Small
question to
business.
you. Um, with respect to the land titles package that was passed in 2000, and this is to remove the RPO, to remove the old law system and replace it with a land
The
title.
RPA.
Yeah, it will remove the RPA, it will remove old law, and it will create a new titling system. This was passed 25 years ago. The Registration of Titles, the Land Act, the Land Tribunal Act, the Land Adjudication Act. It's something similar to what Barbados does. Do you think,
Mhm.
and Tobago is the starting point. So the government has said that they want to start with Tobago. Do you think this is something that is practical and that will improve the land titling issues in Tobago?
Well, I think we have to look at the system itself, and because purchasing property, there are different components, there are different aspects that play a part. You have title, you have how title is established, and you have questions of approvals, proper approvals. Does the property require these things? So if a system is being introduced, it has to factor in how the basic requirements in any landed transaction would feature in that new system.
Yeah. I have a question from Cynthia here. Cynthia is a real estate agent. She's asking, why is it necessary? Well, I don't know how true this is, but you can clarify. Why is it necessary to re-register a deed in Tobago that was received in Trinidad?
So I've never seen anything re-registered, and I do think it's about. I doubt very much it is a question of re-registering a deed, because Tobago is in a position to register deeds at this point in time,
Mhm.
and the Registry General's Department in Trinidad updates their records on a daily basis of what is registered in Tobago. So I don't know if there may have been something in a particular instance, but generally that would not be the case.
Okay. And
Yeah,
a
because the
final
deeds are
question.
registered in Tobago.
Yeah. A final question to you, and I think this really sums up everything. Edgar's asking, how has the legal framework in Tobago affected the ease of doing business, infrastructure, tourism, and all that? How do you think it has impacted on those things?
Um, well, if we're looking at ease of doing business, and let's say we're talking about foreign investors, following Chris James' presentation, Mr. Chris James' presentation, we have only had 5 that has been issued. So I think that from an administrative perspective, that has to be looked at there. So that would affect, business from a foreign investment perspective. Um, Proposed infrastructure development for Tobago. I think once we are able to address the title issues, once we're able to address approvals, ease of getting approvals, and perhaps some sort of consultation with the different divisions under the THE, so that things become easier. the process of moving land becomes easier, but it right now is plagued with issues that need to be addressed, right? Title issues is one of the most important features that affect the movement of property in Tobago between buyers and sellers. You have persons who, for example, die on, and there is no administration of the person's estate. And of course, without that, the title cannot move because it would affect moving from one person to another. It would form part of one of the requirements. So I think we first need to address issues on the ground before we can even look at how it can affect how, Tobago infrastructure would be moved by it.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Paul. This has truly
You're
been
most welcome.
a very informative session, and we have a lot of persons in the chat expressing their gratitude to this for your session.
No
So
problem
thank
at
you very
all.
much once again.
You're most welcome.
Okay,
Thank you for having me.
it's a pleasure. So
Sure, sure.
we will now move on to our final presentation, but before we do so, I would like to remind participants that to please post your questions in the Q&A section. Um, if you see that if you posted a question in the Q&A that was not addressed live by the presenter, you would see that some of our staff may have been responding to your questions, right? Or it could have been that the presenters mentioned this in their presentation, and so we moved it off, all right? Also, many persons are asking about the availability of the information and the documents. Please note that if you click on the menu option in Zoom and you select resources, you will see the presentations there that you can then view and download to have access to that information, right? But remember as well, as Ms. Paul was saying, that this is not professional legal advice. It is general advice. So if you have a specific issue, you are expected to obtain independent legal advice on your specific issue. Okay, so please access the resources section if you would like to get a copy of the presentations. And we are also recording this session so you can view it later on our YouTube channel. We will post a link to that on our website and also on our Facebook page as well. So moving swiftly along, our final presenter for today is Mr. Renaldo Belfon. My computer is sticking. Just give me a second, please. Okay, there we go. So Renaldo is the founder of, I want to say Skyro, but he can clarify, Skyro Business Group, which has grown from a real estate advisory firm into a full-service real estate company under his guidance. Mr. Belfon holds an MPhil from UE and has received several awards from international organizations in the spheres of business and academic research. Outside of his business pursuits, he's a sports lover and has a passion for the environment. So we put him at the end, as Mr. Belfon is going to be really giving us an idea of the real estate market. So we've heard about the economic overview from Dr. Sagewan. We've heard about the tourism industry from Mr. James, and we just heard about the legal and regulatory framework in Tobago. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for to hear about the real estate market, we have Mr. Renaldo Belfon. So without further ado, Renaldo, please take the stage.
Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Lalu. I hope I do not disappoint after you built up the crowd to this crescendo. First things, just to clarify, it's pronounced Ciro. So it's Ciro Business Group, and I'm proud to represent Ciro here today. And I really want to thank the organizers of this event for this invitation. And I hope to, help bring some value and bring some information to the persons viewing here today. I must say though, I must first acknowledge that usually these sorts of activities in the Tobago space are usually done by a lead colleague of ours by the name of Dawn Glacier, who unfortunately would have passed away a couple of months ago. Dawn was the secretary and then honorary secretary of the Association of Real Estate Agents for a number of years, and was the de facto chairperson of the Tobago chapter of the Association of Real Estate Agents, and really was a stalwart for the industry, a lover of Tobago, and it is really big shoes to fill, and I will try to do my best, doing my best Dawn Glacier imitation. Right, so for today's presentation, my job is to provide some insight into the vitals of, if I was a doctor, my role would be to check the patient vitals and to give you some feedback on Tobago's real estate market. And so we're going to jump straight into that. So we're going to jump into the first slide. Right, so when we look at the overall financial picture of the real estate market, looking at the big picture, we see from the figure below that the real estate market has rebounded somewhat from the lockdown during the pandemic era. And so you see during that period between 2020 and 2021, 2022, there was a slowdown in the amount of real estate mortgages being issued by financial institutions. Since then, the figures that we have is up to 2024. We have seen a gradual increase in the amount of mortgage activity taking place. However, I put on the graph below the amount of non-performing or past due real estate loans, which is the lighter blue of the two lines. And as it stands now, we have somewhere between 8 and 12% in the past couple of years post COVID of all loans in the country, of all mortgage loans being past due. And that suggests to me that this is an area that we need to keep an eye on, because it means that the consumer, the persons who are taking out mortgages, seem to be somewhat stressed. And we need to keep an eye on that to ensure that the market does not deteriorate from its current level. And to use a scientific term, the market is currently meh. It's very lukewarm in Tobago. And because real estate is such a localized area, we will go into the reasons why we see these structural changes in the real estate sector, and why some areas of the market are doing well and some are really not doing well at all. So let's change to the next slide. So the structural changes I mentioned about, when you delve into the real estate market into more granular detail, it's important to identify the different client segments that are in the market, and you would see that the factors that drive them are different, and also the level of health of the different segments differs. And so we'll start off with what I labeled here as the Tobago-based real estate, for persons aiming to enter the real estate market who are Tobago-based. And so what we find in the industry, that these persons are usually interested in, your entry-level property, a 2 or 3 bedroom home, maybe a 5,000 to 6,000 square foot parcel of land, because we still have a culture in Tobago where persons prefer to buy land and construct their homes rather than buy a completely, a home that is already built and kitted out. And you see, this segment of the market is currently under a lot of strain because depressed or stagnated, I should say, wages. Now, as my colleague initially, who spoke first, would have mentioned, a large proportion of the Tobago-based consumers or clients are employed with the state sector, whether it's THA or through regional offices of the central government. And I don't need to tell anyone that in a lot of these sectors, the wages have been stagnated. There has not been any price increase in some areas for some in the order of 8 to 10 years, some even longer. And so we have a situation where wages are more or less stagnant, but the cost of goods inflation is rising gradually. And so we have a phenomenon now where a number of young persons in the Tobago-based market especially are not able to start what we call home building, and their progress on the property ladder is stagnated as a result of the more or less stagnation in real wages for persons based in the Tobago market. So what we have now, what we have in this group is there's a lot of demand for persons to get on the property ladder, but the supply of properties at a price that those persons can afford is extremely limited. And so we have a case where people are just delaying starting families, which I'm sure everyone could appreciate is going to have knock-on effects, not only in the Tobago space, but in Trinidad and Tobago space, right? So moving on to the Trinidad-based buyers now. Funnily enough, what we've observed is that in the Tobago real estate market, these Trinidad-based buyers are driving most of the activity in Tobago. Let me repeat that because I think it's a bit of a concern. So I'm hoping that folks that be are hearing me. What we found is that Trinidad-based buyers are driving most of the activity in the Tobago market. And so persons in this segment of the market, because Trinidad has a larger private sector than Tobago, we find that they're not as adversely, or not as many persons are adversely affected by stagnated wages in the public sector. And so we see a lot of interest in second and vacation homes for persons to, start their Airbnb and other such ventures in the Tobago space. I must say that those interests are typically centered around the southwest region of the island. So we're talking communities like Canaan, Bonaccord, Crown Point, to some extent Canby, and to a lesser extent Scarborough and environs. So a lot of practitioners in the real estate space, persons like myself who are real estate brokers, are actually pivoting our services to cater more towards buyers and sellers based in Trinidad rather than in Tobago, right? So the third segment I'd like to touch on, client segment, are the international buyers and sellers. Now, a number of my colleagues before would have spoken about the need for a land license and the effect that that has had on really limiting the amount of foreign residential purchasers in the Tobago space. And as my most recent speaker would have mentioned, there are 7. You could argue Crown Point has been recently added to the list, so 8 designated zones where non-nationals can purchase properties without a land license. So historically, we've seen that there's been a decline in the number of foreign buyers coming into the Tobago space compared to times pre-existing the initiation of this legislation requiring a land license to be sought to purchase properties outside of these 7 or 8 economic zones. But however, I must highlight that in recent years, I would say in the past 1 or 2 years or so, we've seen new regional buyers come to the market, and primarily these are persons from Guyana. So Guyana, as everyone would know, is going through an unprecedented boom in the economy, largely fueled by rents from the oil and gas sector. And what we're seeing is that persons from Guyana have started to test the waters in Trinidad and Tobago. Myself personally had a couple clients from Guyana in the past 3 or 4 weeks. And because it's not a market that I think that the Guyanese population has traditionally been involved with, there is still they're in the discovery phase right now, where persons can, they're now getting used to the Tobago space. And so that could potentially be an avenue for us to get non-national buyers into the country, into the Tobago space. And especially given that they are CARICOM nationals, they won't be the requirement for persons to jump through hoops as would be someone who is from an extra regional territory, right? So although this is hopeful for the future, the current situation is with restrictions with access to foreign currency and limited access to international buyers, is that we have a lot of properties on the high end. We're talking your 5-6 bedroom properties, your mansions. They are currently what I like to call stuck on the market, where they would have been built or purchased by expats coming to Tobago many, many years ago. And they're now at a stage where they would want to, go back to the country of origin, for example. But because they need to get foreign currency in order to restart their lives back in the home country, and we have limited access to foreign exchange reserves in TNT, we have some properties stuck on the market or stranded on the market for years at a time. I think the longest I have seen was a property listed for 12 years, which I believe was actually sold by Dawn before she passed. And so this was a multi-million-dollar property stuck on the market for 12 years, just over a decade, before we were able to get a purchaser for that property. And as we would see later on in the presentation, what we are seeing people doing now is start to accept at least partial payments in foreign currency, some in local currency, and also reducing their demands in terms of what they would like to get their property sold for. But those are what we call hidden discounts, which I'll talk about later on, because it's a very unique and weird phenomenon in the Tobago space, right? So the fourth, I think, distinct client segment that we'd like to touch on is the commercial sector. Now, coming out of COVID, a number of persons would have been forced to transpose their business to working either fully or partially online. Since the pandemic, though, we have seen a phenomenon where many persons have not gone back out to being fully in person, meaning a lot of persons have adopted a model where they work almost entirely online, if possible, and some have downsized their commercial space because they have found an avenue to get an income without requiring lots of commercial rental space to operate their business. So there is very limited demand for commercial space in Tobago at the moment. And the end result of that is we have swaths of properties that are on the market, some of them really good A and B level properties that are partially filled and sometimes completely empty, just because that demand for commercial space is no longer there. Now, of course, apart from persons going to the hybrid or totally online model, I think we cannot ignore the fact that Tobago's economy is not where it once was. And so that general slowdown in Tobago's economy is also partly the cause for this slowdown in commercial activity and limited demand for commercial space. All right. So moving on to the next slide. Right, so moving on to the next slide. To touch briefly on the pricing trends that I mentioned briefly in the past slide, is that sales volumes have picked up a bit since COVID, but they're chugging along. They're not extraordinary. They're not stagnant. They're somewhere in between. They're lukewarm. As I said, the technical term I like to use is meh. So sale volumes are moderate, and what we see is that in terms of listing prices, I have it called here the hidden discount phenomenon, where generally persons often quarrel that the price for an equivalent property in Tobago is much higher than in Trinidad, which on the surface of it, there is some truth to that. But one of the caveats that I've noticed is that although a property may be listed at, let's say, 1.8 million, the vendors may be willing to accept even as low as 1.6 to 1.5 million on that same property. However, the only way that you as a buyer will find that out is by what we call kicking tires, because there is a culture that vendors historically habitually in Tobago do not like dropping the listing price for a property, and so they may have a conversation with a broker like myself or some of my other colleagues that, okay, the prices, the property has been listed on the market for too long. I need to get this place sold. I'm willing to accept XYZ as a price. However, that listing price change, that sticker price, is not going to change for whatever cultural reasons it could be, because Tobago is a small space. You don't want your neighbor to know the business. So there's a lot of that going on where I call a hidden discount phenomenon. So if it is you're interested in purchasing property in Tobago, I would advise you not to be daunted by the sticker prices or the listing prices that you see, but you need to get a good agent to work with you to help kick some tires and find out what are the real prices that that vendors are willing to sell the properties for or negotiate on your behalf. Right? And lastly, on the pricing and sale trends, what we've seen is that the time on market, even for properties that are well priced, is increasing, and definitely much longer, much more extended than in Trinidad. Now, when I say well priced, I mean when there is a good match between the listing price and the value of a property. Now, value and price are two different things, which I'm sure you could appreciate. And so even when properties are listed at a price which a real estate professional could determine is good value, we've seen that the time on market is considerably longer than in Trinidad and is increasing each and every year here in Tobago. Right, so on the next slide now, right, Diving into factors influencing the market and some areas where I think some relief can be brought to bear. Stagnant wages. As I said in I think second or third slide, prices or wages have been stagnant for public sector workers, which make up the majority of Tobago's population, or working population. And I definitely do not envy the minister of finance or any persons in the state sector. But I'm not sure how much longer young persons in particular, can continue with wages at their current level without it even more adversely affecting their ability to start families and to go through the natural processes of life that we typically expect. Your day to get married, you have children, etc., etc. And so I suspect that we may be setting us up for economic and other issues in the future if we do not address this issue of stagnant wages. Another area to look at that is influencing the market is, of course, government policies and incentives. So we've spoken on and on, different speakers, about the landholding license and ways to incentivize international buyers. But I would like to place on record that we could possibly look at our cousins over in Guyana as a possible new market to explore in terms of getting international, better put, regional investments into real estate and in other sectors in Tobago. Right, and finally, infrastructural developments. So I'm pleased to say that, as Mr. James touched on, we have a really beautiful new airport terminal on the horizon. The exact opening date seems to be a bit of a mystery at the moment, but I am hopeful, and I think that most persons are confident that this opening of the airport terminal will be the first step in revitalizing Tobago's economy. Of course, the additional steps include the bringing on stream of the higher end accommodation, which is currently on the drawing board with properties on the southwest of the island. A lot of accommodation on the drawing board on the southwest of the island, and at least one major project on the eastern end of the island in the Roxbow area. And honestly, the sooner that these things can come to fruition, the faster we would see a significant improvement in the real estate market in Tobago. Right, and so on to the last slide now. Right, so some key takeaways from the presentation. Currently, right now in Tobago, it's a buyer's market. Once you're willing to kick some tires, as we say, and negotiate, buyers are able to negotiate much better prices than listing prices and get good value. And we see a shift towards the market being dominated by Trinidad-based buyers. I love all my fellow nationals, so that's not an issue where the buyers come from. There's also an opportunity for us to reimagine the use of commercial properties. As it stands now, we have a lot of vacant commercial properties, and so I believe that we could take the lead of markets abroad, which are trying to repurpose some of these commercial spaces. And I must also add that the access to commercial space is an issue unique to Tobago, in that most of the commercial spaces are in Scarborough, especially office type, and most retail is in the Scarborough region. However, Scarborough geographically, there's of course downtown, which is flat, and uptown, which is hilly. Now, in times gone by, when I was a child, and definitely during my mother's and grandparents' day, down uptown was busier than uptown. But I guess due to each person's advanced age, nobody wants to go uptown anymore because it's very, very steep. And I'm part of an initiative to help revitalize the commercial sector in Scarborough by providing free shuttle service around Scarborough. It's still in on the initial stages right now, and I'm hopeful that efforts like this will help revitalize the commercial sector by making the business district more accessible to a number of persons. Right, and finally, while it is a very lukewarm market, I am confident that the investments that are currently being taken place, that have been taken place by the government and other actors in the private sector also, we're at a stage now where we're investing, and I'm sure that once we continue on the trajectory that we're on, we're going to see a rebound and a revitalization of Tobago's real estate market. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belfon. We have some questions coming in the chat, but I see Chris has raised his hand. Chris, would you like to add anything to what Ronaldo is saying?
Just two things, Renaldo. Just one correction, because I was one of the authors of the DDAs. They still require a license, but it's supposed to be easier. That is not proven. That's not proven to be the case. I've dealt with people. I've dealt with people that have tried to get a license within the DDAs, and it's still a problem. In terms of your commercial, one of the things I didn't raise, and I should have done, Roger Hussein came to a function we had, and I'm pushing this digital nomad market. There are 40 million digital nomads worldwide. Most of the islands in the region are giving license or residency for a year, annual residency for a year for these digital nomads. We are not doing it. It's a major problem for any foreign investment. People in Trinidad and Tobago, after 3 months, have to leave. So we cut ourselves off from health tourism, sometimes education tourism, some of these things that we could do long term. A lot of the people that come from Canada would like to stay here for the whole winter of Canada. But after 3 months, people here have to leave. Sometimes they go to Grenada for the day and come back. It's a whole nonsense. Other islands have dealt with this throughout the region. And it's something that could help not only with the real estate property market, but also with this commercial market, because I don't have the figures for Barbados, but I know they are doing very, very well with the digital nomads. And they have to pay a fee. I think it's $1,000 US per person to come for a year. They don't work in any business that's available in Barbados. They're working online, internationally for companies that are based in New York or London or wherever. And they are able to come and stay and spend their money for a whole year. And that could help us with a lot of commercial space. And I know, for instance, in Turks and Caicos, they've actually opened a whole, the reason I'm talking about commercial is they've opened a whole building just for commercial, just for digital nomads. So it's a market we should look into. And thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your comments about Dawn. She will be sorely missed.
Thank you very much, Chris. So we have a few questions coming in. Some I would need to moderate because I think they were addressed already in previous presentations. Edgar is asking, is the THA moving towards addressing affordable housing for Tobagonians? Do you know, Ronaldo?
Right. So the THA has been putting a lot of, I would say, effort into affordable housing, into getting affordable housing for Tobagonians. Let me just paint the big picture. There is a division of settlements, I believe it's Division of Settlement and Urban Utilities, which is tasked with this responsibility. Now, on the settlement side of their mandate, I know that they have poured a tremendous amount of resources into providing grants for the some construction of homes, but more so towards doing renovation and that sort of thing, even possible expansion from a single family home into a multifamily home in some instances. And that is pretty well advertised, and there's a lot of uptake for it. Now, the issue is when people think housing, they don't really think about these grants. They think about state built and provided and allocated properties. Now, there are currently 4 or 5 different areas that are under construction, under development by the same division. And there has been recent allocations of land, not so many houses. I think they've built about 4 or 5 houses in this past term of the existing of the current administration, but mostly it is land based. So there are efforts being made in that regard. But I think people are clamoring more for built structures, because even when persons are allocated land, we've seen because of the stagnation in real wages, yes, you're allocated land, but you can't build on it. So it's a case where they're making efforts, yes, but more needs to be done in order for it to have a meaningful effect on the number of persons who actually have who become homeowners.
Okay. Andrea has a question, but Andrea, I cannot address that question because it deals with opinions of professionals, and we are a valuation firm. So I cannot encourage or say anything that could bring disrepute to anyone, right? So we cannot address that. But of course, people have experiences. I can tell you that some people will say this valuer gets higher values than somebody else. It boils down to opinion. And what I can say is that valuations are supposed to use market transaction as evidence. And it ought to be a level playing field where we all have the same access to the same information, but that's not the case. Okay.
Can I just say on that when I
Yes.
made the comment about value and versus price in the statement, it wasn't talking about valuators. It was in the instance where, as a broker, you'd have a conversation with a vendor, and they said, obviously the question of selling price comes up, and usually vendors are not willing to get the properties valued first before they list it on the market. You're kind of spitball what you think the property would go for, and then put it on the market. Now, usually they would ask a broker to give them just a rough estimate of what they think the property could sell for. And what we find happens is that I, as a broker, might estimate, let's say you could sell it within this region, but inevitably the seller thinks that it's way more than what a broker would recommend as a selling price. And I see that right now happening, particularly, as I mentioned, the airport. We see properties around the airport with some, I would say, very high listing prices, because I think there's a little bit of over exuberance, the word, or just exuberance about the prospect of the airport bringing more increasing property values. So I think people are going a little bit overboard in instances like that. So that was the context in which I raised the
What do
comment.
you think has caused the pivot away from property in Scarborough versus the Crown Point Bonaccord area that you mentioned?
Um, well, when you mention Crown Point, what comes to mind is entertainment, fun, beach. When you mention the word Scarborough, what comes to what comes to mind to me is Dusty are coming to do some sort of business transaction. So the type of person that is pulled towards the southwest of the island, the Crown Point of the island, Bonaccord, etc. They are more geared towards persons who are coming for relaxation, they're coming for a staycation, that sort of thing. Whereas Scarborough is more business, and that business primarily is state business that interacts with the state.
Okay. So can you tell us, Renaldo, in your experience, what are some of the specific challenges in Tobago that you think can be addressed in the short to medium term? Like if you were to say, what are the top three things that you think need to be addressed with respect to to transactions, to developing the sale market, or to helping things move along faster in terms of ease of doing business? What would be your top ticket items that you think need to be addressed right away?
I would probably keep it very basic and trying to match supply and demand, because that's ultimately what we're doing here, trying to match supply and demand. And I think that there were efforts some years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, for the state to partner with private developers to bring more properties on stream. Unfortunately, that effort didn't make it much past the campaign trail. But I think that rather than the state trying to develop properties on their own, trying to develop lands on their own, I'm not sure that the state is ideally suited for this, or so I think co-opting the private sector to develop land on their behalf and then sell it back to the state, which was what was being proposed. I can't remember the name of the scheme. I think something like that, which helps, forms a partnership between private developers and the state, can help us really efficiently and quickly address the supply issues that we have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Renaldo. That has been a very informative presentation. And this now brings us to the end of the seminar. I would now like to ask one of our directors, Mr. Ryan Chin, to give his vote of thanks and closing remarks. Ryan?
Thank you very much, Sonel. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we bring today's proceedings to a close, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the conversations we've shared. Our presenters gave us a powerful framework for understanding Tobago's next steps. Dr. Indera Sagewan outlined Tobago's economic outlook and growth trends, giving us a clear picture of the road ahead. Mr. Chris James reminded us of the critical role of tourism and hospitality, which is at the very heart of Tobago's identity. Ms. Oneesha Paul grounded us with her insights on the legal and regulatory landscape, keeping us mindful that ambition must be matched with compliance. And finally, Mr. Renaldo Belfon shedding light on real estate market dynamics, offering valuable insights into the opportunities and challenges in this sector. So collectively, these perspectives remind us that Tobago's future rests on collaboration, foresight, and action. Typically, Tobago would form part of our wider residential real estate seminar, but this year we felt strongly that Tobago deserved its very own platform. Today's event, Coast to Coast, Next Step Tobago, was our way of creating that dedicated space to focus on the unique opportunities and challenges facing this island. Before we officially close, it would be also remiss of me not to acknowledge the recent passing of Mrs. Dawn Glacier of CJ Investments, a highly respected professional who made a lasting contribution to the real estate industry in Tobago. Her dedication and impact will long be remembered, and we extend our deepest condolences to her family, her colleagues, and all who mourn her loss. I also want to extend thanks once again to our stakeholders, banks, financial institutions, credit unions, real estate professionals, developers, and all affiliated partners for the time they took to join us virtually. your engagement is what makes discussions like these so impactful. So as we look towards our 50th anniversary in 2026, we remain inspired by the legacy of our founder, Mr. Gordon Farrell. His vision, dedication, integrity set the foundation on which we continue to build. So on behalf of our board of directors, our presenters, and the entire G.A. Farrell and Associates family, thank you once again for being part of today's event. Let us carry forward the momentum of these discussions and commit to shaping Tobago's future going forward. So again, have a wonderful day. Wishing you all the best from coast to coast. Sunil, back to you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It has indeed been our pleasure to host this webinar. As you know, we've made it an annual thing. The reason why we come up with these topics and decided to focus on Tobago and solicited the support of these specific presenters is because of feedback that we have received from you. So if there is something you would like to see dealt with in a webinar like this by us, and we try to keep it free, we do not charge persons to attend our webinars. So it's free CPD for those in the profession. Real estate valuation is free CPD. And so we would like to hear from you what you think about this. If you think that there is something that we can improve upon, if you think that there are some topics that can be addressed or should be addressed. So once the webinar closes, there would be a very short survey that we are kindly asking you to take so that you can let us know, give us the feedback and let us know what you think should be included. Right? As I mentioned before, the recording of this will be on our YouTube channel, links to which will be posted on both our website and on our Facebook page. So thank you once again. Thanks to all of the presenters who very competently and adeptly dealt with their topical areas. And have a good afternoon, everyone. So thank you and take care. And please stay on for the poll.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.